This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. The breaking news, as you just heard in your news bulletin, is that the Secretary of Iran's intelligence services, their key security chief, has, according to reports from Israel, been removed from the map, been killed in this probably illegal war. He was also Iran's chief nuclear negotiator between 2005 and 2007. More on that as and when it emerges. But we find ourselves once again contemplating what do you do if there's only one story in town? It's happened a surprising amount of times in the last few years. Prior to, you're probably going to correct me on this, but prior to 2016, I don't remember it happening at all. Every day there would be 2 or 3 things vying for our attention at an absolute minimum. But during COVID, certainly, and during Brexit, you just felt that it would be inappropriate to talk about anything else. This is just me, by the way. It's not in any way a criticism, veiled or otherwise, of other people. Criticisms would involve talking about absolute rubbish to avoid acknowledging how wrong you were about the big stuff going on in the world. There criticisms there galore, either veiled or unveiled, whatever you prefer. But I mean, you can't have a news bulletin, for example, that's only got one story in it, can you? It would be weird. Except when there is something like COVID in its very early days, or indeed a war in its very early days. Look at Ukraine. Look at Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to Keir Starmer today, and argue, if you dare, with the observation that public interest wanes. It waxes and it wanes, and the news both reflects and creates that process. I don't know. I find it fascinating. I know you may not, because I do it for a living, and you don't. Well, most of you don't. I did receive a message earlier today from one of my favourite broadcasters asking for advice on where he can get a mug like mine. I might leave you to guess who that was, because I haven't checked whether or not they'd be comfortable with having their privacy stripped away. But if you don't do it for a living, maybe it isn't as fascinating to you as it is to me. Do you know why it's so important and so interesting? Listen, and this is unlikely, frankly, because it would render you somebody who's probably not intellectually qualified to listen to this programme. But if you feel yourself groaning when I point out the 4 donkeys of the Cropocalypse and their relevance to everything that's going on today, you're missing a huge point. We would not now be facing what we're facing with Donald Trump if our political and media establishment had correctly reported and responded to the triple disasters of Brexit, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. The quadruple disasters, in fact, of austerity, Brexit, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. If you're creating an ecosystem in which the truth doesn't matter, and the deranged, and more on that word in a moment, in which the deranged can prevail, in which a deranged liar can rule. Now, we probably wouldn't have been able to affect the American election result, but we certainly wouldn't be looking at newspapers in this country that have chosen to report the deranged liar's latest insults and latest obnoxious attacks upon our dignified and democratically elected Prime Minister. We certainly wouldn't be living in a country where organs like the Daily Mail feel compelled to report it from Trump's perspective, or with Trump in the box seat, or with their head so far up Trump's backside that when he breaks wind they whistle. I think it's all linked. If you want to understand how the truly terrible things happening now can have been permitted to happen, you can't just focus on the destination. You want to understand how you got to a destination, you've got to look at the steps on the road, the steps on the path to that place. This is, if anything, if I have anything close to a world view or a philosophy, this is it. It's the boiling the frog doctrine. It's the idea that none of us would have supported or even perhaps contemplated the likelihood of Z existing if it wasn't for the 25 previous letters. So they sold you A, and then they sold you B, and then they sold you C. And A was fairly mild, and B was just a tiny bit more bonkers, and C was relatively straightforward, and D was debatable, and E was not extraordinary, and F was flipping... you see what I mean? And then suddenly it's Z, and you're saying, oh, yeah, we're having a discussion in the United Kingdom about whether we should send our forces to help a deranged liar dig himself out of a hole that he's dug for no reason other than, and then you insert whatever theory you prefer, whether it is Marco Rubio's contention that he is just dancing to Benjamin Netanyahu's tune, or whether he has taken complete leave of his senses, or whether he's been paid a huge sum of money to undertake this ludicrous war, or whether he did it because he thought that his approval ratings would bounce in the way that George W. Bush's did after the invasion of Iraq. You just pick your theory, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter because it's Z. We're at Z now. We're actually having debates in this country about whether the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is right or wrong not to jump into bed with a deranged liar and start bouncing about with abandon. That's question number one. Question number two about whether or not we respond to attacks upon our allies, and question number three whether or not we get involved in attempts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz are, as I fear not enough people are pointing out, they're three completely different questions, and they all involve returning to the Chilcot checklist. And that is what Starmer is doing, returning to the Chilcot checklist, returning to international law, returning to the importance of a clear and viable plan at every different junction. So Starmer has no choice but to conduct himself as if Donald Trump were not well, I don't know. Does he? Does he have a choice? Does he have a choice? And that's my question for you today. I'm going to play you some clips, but they are leading us towards this question. And this question is, why is it so hard for all of us, because I've only relatively recently managed to do this, there's two questions, and I think they're really interesting, but I'm going to need your help with them, all right? Why is it so hard for all of us, whether you have accepted it or not, it was still not easy to do. Why is it so hard for all of us to accept that Donald Trump is a deranged liar, or at least that all of the evidence available suggests that he is a deranged liar? So more examples coming for you in a minute. 0345 60 60973. And does it matter? Would anything be different if everything was being reported through that lens? So if you just had constant caveats on everything he says that said things like, of course, he is notoriously dishonest, or of course he continues to contend that he won an election that he lost. Is it the fact that we don't have the professional vocabulary? And I'm thinking partly about the media and partly about you and your relationship with the media. We don't have the professional vocabulary to... what would the word be? To properly describe or articulate what is going on, because we can't go to that place where we accept that POTUS is a deranged liar. Let me give you some examples. And this is from yesterday. I thought that was important. I wasn't going to go back over the archive and go back over all of the clips that we've shared, all of the moments that we've shared together over the last year and a bit, because that would make my job too easy. I wanted to focus exclusively on yesterday, and I wanted to try and pin it down to half a dozen moments in a single press conference, or cronies and allies, his ridiculous colleagues in the regime, appearing on television and having to try to behave in a way that ignored the fact that their boss is not a deranged liar. I think, in terms of being a liar, I think that this is probably the best example. And remember, all of these clips are from yesterday and yesterday alone. Have a listen to this.
Other presidents should have done... I spoke to one of the former presidents who I actually like. I actually speak to some. I do like some people, be shocking. And he said, I wish I did what you did. Could have done it. Other presidents, somebody should have done it. 47 years this went on. They call Iran the bully of the Middle East.
He hasn't spoken to any other presidents. Or at least, if he has, they are currently all denying it. And which president would it be? There are, I think, to the best of my memory, only 4 who are currently alive. There is Barack Obama, who, because he's a racist, he keeps calling Barack Hussein Obama, because that word Hussein is designed, when he uses it, to provoke a negative reaction among people who don't like foreign. Bill Clinton, who he has made no secret of his hatred for. And then you have got the Bushes, right? You've got George W. Bush and his dad. Is that have I got that right? Have I missed one out? Jimmy Carter passed away relatively recently, so you've got two Bushes, a Clinton and an Obama, all of whom, when contacted by journalists or when letting journalists know via the usual channels, have denied completely that they approve of what Donald Trump is doing. George H.W. is dead. Who's the fourth then? I mean, or is there only three? I'll get the article for you in a minute. But it's possible he was looking in a mirror. It's possible that he'd manages to contact George Washington via a Ouija board. I don't know. I mean, all of these things with Donald Trump. Flipping Biden. Of course it's Biden. Flipping heck. What on earth are your qualifications to conduct a conversation like this, O'Brien? You can't even remember the last one. So Biden, Clinton, and George H.W. Bush and Barack Obama. One of those men has reportedly told Donald Trump that he has his full support for the invasion of Iran and that they wish they'd done it themselves. I mean, here's part of the problem. And you know what's going to happen to my inbox now? It's going to be filled with the word Biden for the next 4 minutes, and then there'll be a pause, and then all the people who are listening on catch-up will start texting me the word Biden as well, as if I wouldn't have noticed my mistake as quickly as I have done and moved on. It wasn't just me, actually. Keith was silent. 14 minutes after 10 is the time. I mean, listen, that's part of the problem, because I say liar, right? And I feel uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable, partly because I've got legal training as a journalist. I suppose partly in my subconscious, because Donald Trump sues people for $10 billion. He puts his little finger in the corner of his mouth. And, $10 billion so I can only tell you that all four living presidents have let it be known that they're forgetting Joe Biden on Patrick's Day. All right, lads, give us a break. I'm sorry. All four have let it be known that it isn't them that he's been talking to. Hey, he could have made his own little effigy of a former president out of chewed up toilet paper and put little raisins in for eyes and I don't know, a little matchstick for a nose, and then said, "Hello, Mr. President, do you approve of my invasion of Iran?" And then done his own voice for the effigy president. Go, "Yes, Donald, you're the best. You're the greatest. I wish I had been more like you." And if he was doing that, seriously, in a closed room, if you found out, if footage emerged of Donald Trump having a conversation with a puppet that he'd made out of chewed up toilet paper, how shocked would you be? How shocked would you be? And that's the problem that we've all got, because you wouldn't be that shocked. Yes, you're the greatest president. Doobie-doobie-doo. I love you, Donald. I love you, Donald. I love your new marble. I love your new building. You're the greatest. You're the greatest. How shocked would you be? So, why do we find it? And this is a really interesting and, for me at least, important question. Why do we find it so hard? Is it because of the fear of what it would mean? Or is it something subtler than that, more sophisticated than that, less obvious than that? Why do we find it so hard, still, after so long and with so much evidence, to call a spade a spade? To call, and the word deranged, I'm a little bit uncomfortable, and I'm afraid I fail at this hurdle sometimes. I fall at this hurdle. Language that minimises or opens the door to the mockery of mental health issues. So, madman, I'm not hypersensitive to this stuff, but if I genuinely believe that we're in danger of causing entirely unnecessary offence to wholly innocent and decent people, I like to be a little bit more cautious than perhaps I used to be. But deranged is okay, not least because, of course, all of the people who still get paid for their opinions, but who were using Trump derangement syndrome as an insult to direct at people accurately describing Trump and now accurately predicting the scale of the disasters that he would visit upon the world. That they introduced that word into this particular lexicon, so I'm comfortable using it. Why do we find it so hard? Why do we find it so hard to both accept and report that the President of the United States of America is a deranged liar? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And the second, slightly stranger question is does it actually matter? So look at what Keir Starmer did with the state visit. He treated him as if he were not a deranged liar, right? And it went quite well for a couple of days. It looked like quite a good thing to do. And now it has been rendered an utterly pointless exercise because Donald Trump is being obnoxious and dishonest and vile towards Keir Starmer. So the only reason Starmer did that was to keep Trump sweet in relation to his attitude to the United Kingdom. But what did he do? He smacked us with tariffs. What did he do? He insulted our Prime Minister. What did he do? He made comments about our role in NATO that demonstrate either deliberate misleading or abject ignorance regarding NATO's role and what NATO is. And that's another phone-in for another day. Does he genuinely not understand this stuff, or does he pretend not to understand this stuff? But I think this might be one of those hours where the second question gets more interesting than the first question. So why do we find it so hard to do this? Why do journalists, for example, find it so hard? Because they can. I'm not sure that politicians can. I'm not sure that Keir Starmer or Mark Carney or Emmanuel Macron can actually stand up and describe the difficulties of dealing with a deranged maniac. But why can't the media tell the truth? Is it because we're frightened? And I'm seeing the media here partly as a vessel for public opinion. And I'm going to use myself as the lab rat. Why did I struggle until about 6 weeks ago? To go all in on the idea that he is a deranged liar and there is no point expecting him to behave any differently or to discover decency or to finally become a statesman. He is a deranged liar. Is it a fear of what it tells us about humanity itself that makes us so reluctant to go there? If he's a deranged liar and he can be the democratically elected leader of the free world with his fingers on a nuclear capability that boggles the mind, what does it say about us? Not good enough just to say, well, it says nothing about me, it's all on the people that voted for him. We are of the same species, and we have put a deranged maniac in the most powerful position on the planet. We have done that. The human species has done that. They have looked at a liar. They have looked at a maniac. They have looked at a madman, and they have said, yeah, let's put him in charge. Is that why we're so frightened of pinning it down? Is that why we're so frightened of acknowledging it? Because we're frightened of what it says about us. And you can't get away with saying our fellow man, our fellow men and women, our fellow vote, because change the wind, change your education, change your upbringing, could have been you. Why are we so fearful and or reluctant to call Donald Trump a deranged liar? 0345 6060 973. And crucially, I've barely got started on the clips, by the way, the case for the prosecution, but if you want to interrupt me, you know what to do. Crucially, does it matter? Would it change anything if the bedrock of commentary and description were to go to this unprecedented place where it simply calls a spade and describes Donald Trump as the deranged liar that he so obviously is? Why does it feel so hard even now to do this when the evidence that it is correct is absolutely overwhelming? Go on, have a little think and give us a call on 0345 6060 973. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through, all right? You don't have to answer both questions, because I think that does it matter is probably a harder question to answer than why do we struggle with it so much? But we'll find out after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
23 after 10. So more on the case for the prosecution. Have a listen to this. There's something obvious here, which is Trump's absolute unfitness for office. But there's something also quite extraordinary given the context in which he has chosen to talk about Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. Check this out.
The President of the United States, Gavin Newsom, admitted that he has learning disabilities, dyslexia, everything about him is dumb.
Yeah, you heard that correctly. And we're back to that little effigy made out of toilet paper that he's talking to in a private room off the Oval Office, because this is him in the Oval Office. Listen, for the avoidance of doubt, Gavin Newsom is the governor of California and Donald Trump is the president of the United States of America, right? And this happened yesterday.
The president of the United States, Gavin Newsom, admitted that he has learning disabilities, dyslexia, everything about him is dumb.
So that's deranged, right? Here's the classic lie.
Other presidents should have done. I spoke to one of the former presidents who I actually like. Actually speak to some. I do like some people, be shocking. And he said, I wish I did what you did. Could have done it. Other presidents, somebody should have done it. 47 years this went on. They call Iran the bully of the Middle East.
So you have there an example of him being deranged and an example of him being a liar. Here's an example of him being both at the same time.
You know, if I didn't terminate Barack Hussein Obama's Iran nuclear deal, you would right now, well, Israel would be gone, it would be incinerated, and probably the Middle East likewise. And remember, they have all of those missiles. And I heard they were sending missiles to UAE. I said, that's strange. You know, UAE is like the banker for Iran. They're like the banker. Qatar, their neighbors, they got along okay. Saudi Arabia. All of a sudden, Kuwait is getting hit. Bahrain is getting, all these countries are getting hit. There was no expert that would say that was going to happen. It's not a question of like, gee, should you have known? And if we did know, big deal. I mean, we have to do what we have to do.
Deranged and lying there. Then we move on to, I think, mostly deranged. And this is, of course, what happens when deranged overshadows lying. This is him being deranged and you wishing, or at least hoping, that he's lying. So have a look at how well things are going in Iran and ask yourself what you'd do next.
I think Cuba, I don't know, in its own way, for tourism and everything else, it's a beautiful island, great weather. They're not in a hurricane zone, which is nice for a change, They won't be asking us for money for hurricanes every week. But I think Cuba's seen the end. All my life I've been hearing about the United States and Cuba. When will the United States do it? I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba. That'd be good. That's a big honor.
Taking Cuba.
Taking Cuba in some form, yeah. Taking Cuba. I mean, whether I free it, take it, I think I could do anything I want with it. You want to know the truth? They're a very weakened nation right now. They were for a long time. Very violent leaders.
Little echo there. I don't know if you picked up on it, on how he talks about women when he is owning up to sexually assaulting them for fun. You can do anything you want when you're famous. He's taken that attitude and now deployed it in the context of international relations. So we've got deranged, dishonest, deranged and dishonest, deranged. Here's disgusting.
Prime Minister of UK, United Kingdom, yesterday told me, I'm meeting with my team to make a determination. I said, you don't need to meet it with the team. You're the Prime Minister. You can make your own. Why do you have to meet with your team to find out whether or not you're going to send some minesweepers to us or to send some boats? I said, you don't have to meet with your team. It's the same thing here. I can tell you that when this is over, oil prices are going to go down very, very rapidly. So is inflation, so is everything else.
I mean, off the top of my head, people you might want to consult before undertaking a war like that would include your military and your lawyers. But Trump doesn't get it. I don't know whether that goes under deranged, dishonest, disgusting, or all three. And this is what happens when you are called upon to defend him. This is what happens when, as a member of the regime, you are called upon to defend the indefensible. Listen to Rick Scott trying to do precisely that.
If the Strait of Hormuz doesn't open, how are oil prices in the United States going to come down?
Well, it'll open eventually. I mean, eventually it's going to open. But in the meantime, we need to do what we're doing. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. They cannot have ballistic missiles. Right?
How long do you think it could be closed?
How long is it going to take to make sure they don't have nuclear weapons? How long is it going to take to make sure they don't have ballistic missiles that can destroy Americans? They've been killing us for 47 years. This had to end at some point, and I don't want it on American soil. The president did the right thing. Do I want oil prices to come down? I want them to come down badly just like everybody else, but I don't want to die, and I want people in this country to die of a nuclear weapon from Iran. They want to kill us. Let's be realistic here. The main goal here is destroy their ability to kill us.
Desperate, actually. I suppose you go for the 4 Ds: deranged, dishonest, disgusting, and desperate. Donald Trump said in the previous clip that if Iran possessed nuclear weapons, they'd have used them. And then you've got Rick Scott popping up and claiming that, we've got to carry on bombing them to make sure that they haven't got the nuclear weapons that Donald Trump told us they would have used if they had them. And then the final thing is horrible, because this involves a politician who wasn't in the room. This is Trump with Mike Johnson discussing a diagnosis, a secret and private diagnosis that a Florida Republican called Neil Dunn had received. And this speaks to, pure disgusting, actually. I thought when I opened the show this morning we were just going to be jumping between deranged and dishonest. But, of course, if we talk about the cronies, then you bring in desperate, because Mike Johnson has to sit there grinning like an imbecile throughout this hideous exchange. And disgusting doesn't come close to what he has just done to Neil Dunn and his family.
Congressman Neil Dunn of Florida had some real health challenges, and it was very serious, and had a pretty grim diagnosis. And I mentioned it to the president, and I said, Congressman Dunn is a real champion and a patriot because he's still coming to work. And if others got this diagnosis, they would be apt to go home and retire. And
what was the diagnosis?
It was, I think it was a terminal diagnosis.
He would be dead by June.
Okay, that wasn't public, but yeah, okay. That's it was grim. That's what I was going to say.
You hear the groan. He's boasting about the fact that this guy is continuing to shore up his majority, despite the fact that he is in receipt of a diagnosis that says he'll be dead by June, or was in receipt of a diagnosis that said he'd be dead by June. And listen, the groan, I'm going to play that again because the groan speaks to what I'm speaking about today. This is what happens even in a room full of sycophants, right? This is what happens when your brain can't quite engage quickly enough to stop your mouth from authenticity. This is an incredible moment because everybody in that room is a sycophant. And just in that nanosecond, they can't disguise their disgust at what he's doing. This is what happens when you haven't got the space all the time and you only need a split second to bolt on your smile, to pretend everything's normal, to do what the president wants. Listen to this again, because this is what happens when all of these hideous masks of sycophancy slip.
Congressman Neil Dunn of Florida had some real health challenges, and it was very serious, and had a pretty grim diagnosis. And I mentioned it to the president, and I said, Congressman Dunn is a real champion and a patriot because he's still coming to work. And if others got this diagnosis, they would be apt to go home and retire. And
what was the diagnosis?
It was, I think it was a terminal diagnosis.
He would be dead by June.
Okay, that wasn't public, but yeah, okay. That's it was grim. That's what I was going to say.
And the groan. That's people who are primed, programmed, and determined always to approve and to cheer everything the president does, even as they know he's lying. Just in that moment, they couldn't quite keep it together. They couldn't quite keep it in. So, when the evidence of his depravity and his derangement and his dishonesty is so absolutely clear, why do we all struggle to acknowledge it, articulate it, and report everything in the context of it? Hit the numbers now. You should get through. Be quick. 0345 6060 973. It's 10:33. Lottie Morley has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:36, and literally off the top of my head, at least one of the moments from yesterday that we haven't played out to you is the one where he claimed that he predicted Osama bin Laden would blow up the World Trade Center in a book that he wrote. And I don't know where you start with the lies on that. He didn't, and he didn't write the book. It was like all his books, it was ghostwritten by somebody else, and it did not contain a prediction that Osama bin Laden would one day blow up the World Trade Center. His only real public statement regarding the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center was to lie about the fact that it had rendered one of his buildings now the tallest in man. On the day that it happened, people are jumping out of the windows of the World Trade Center to avoid burning to death. Donald Trump is on television boasting that because that building has come down, his is now the tallest in Manhattan, which was also a lie. So the question just gets bigger and bigger every minute. Why do we, and I use we both loosely and advisedly, why do we still not describe him accurately as a disgusting, deranged liar. What is holding anybody back? Not everybody. My colleague Nick Abbott was way ahead of me on this, although his language, I think, is a little bit more diplomatic. Not always. And there are others on both sides of the Atlantic, but the establishment, the mainstream, still can't do it. The BBC political editor, Chris Mason, writes a piece today that is literally written as if Donald Trump is just another president. Just another president. Oh, the elephant in the room, Donald Trump has insulted Keir Starmer. I mean, why? Have we not yet reached a place where we can all say he is deranged, he is disgusting, he is dishonest, but we still have to deal with him? Emily's in Milan. Emily, thank goodness we can hear someone else's voice for a moment or two.
Hello.
Hello, Emily. What would you like to say?
I think it's so hard.
I know.
Because the powers of the U.S. presidency are extraordinary. And they're deadly serious in a way that I don't think any of us want to confront or admit. And I was in Abu Dhabi when the attacks on Iran started.
Right.
And I never thought that I would be in a war zone in my life. But Iran reacted by sending missiles and drones to attack Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And I was there with my family, and we were getting missile alerts, and we were seeing them and hearing them being shot out of the sky. And my kids were scared. I was scared. So to think that the person that is in charge of this is not sober and thoughtful is a horrifying thing that you have to face. The very worst night of the attacks that I witnessed is when Trump posted something on his whatever knockoff Twitter, and it was so deranged and so insulting to the Iranians. And I just remember thinking, he's not going to have to deal with those consequences. We are, and the American troops are. And that was the worst night of the attacks. And my husband had to put a mattress up against the glass window because there were so many missiles being shot out of the sky that night.
And you can't rationalize it in ways that previous wars could be rationalized, even if they subsequently turned out to have been launched on dodgy information or launched on a lie, depending on your perspective. You could rationalize it because in that moment, you believed the people, or enough people believed the people, telling them the reasons why the war was happening. But that phrase, you've used two phrases there. I mean, first of all, you're a mistress of understatement for describing Donald Trump as not being sober and thoughtful. And that's an extraordinarily generous depiction of the man. But, of course...
But that's what you want in a president.
I know. But if there's sober and thoughtful here on a scale, then you need 47 new scales and to go to the bottom of all of them before you get to where Donald Trump sits. Because it's the fact that a crazy person is in charge of everything that actually compounds your terror in those moments. And is it a survival instinct to shut down that thought? Is that why we can't do it? Because... the prospect is too terrifying. War is terrifying. War launched by a madman is terrifying squared.
Yes. And so what do you do in that situation except, like, hope and pray that somebody rational around him is going to intervene or give him advice that maybe he'll listen to, because that is the only way that we can get out of that situation. But
that ain't going to happen. That was first-term Trump. Second-term Trump, there is nobody in that role. Nobody in that position.
I know. But I don't think, yes, I agree with you. But I think that's the reason people don't want, I don't think people have realized the consequences of our vote until this war.
Really? You'd go that far? Had you?
I really would. Because, I mean, me.
No, but had you realised? Did you realise the consequences?
Oh, yes, yeah, of course. Of course. But I think in the U.S. right now, or at least before the election, it was just very much a war on, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It was this a war on wokeness
Yeah.
and politically correct speak, and it was just a joke.
It was like trolling.
And,
It was like internet
meme.
trolling
It was like
on
trolling
a huge scale.
Yeah, it was trolling and memes, and I think this has brought about. No, the presidency really is a serious position that needs to be occupied by somebody thoughtful and sober, and we can't just put somebody in there because we don't like wokeness or trans people or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't think people took it seriously, and we're seeing this play out.
Well, a lot of people still don't, and of course never will. That's another nature of humanity, isn't it? In that we find it much, much harder to climb down from a position than we do to climb up. But the public support for the war is pitifully and historically low. What about the media? You will know more about the US media than I do, but I mean, that succession of clips that I just played there, they're all publicly available. They're all out there on the internet, and they were all broadcast live on television. So people are watching what we're watching, and they are not necessarily arriving at the same conclusions that everybody should. And a lot of the responsibility of that must lie with the professionals whose job it is to tell the truth, to publish and be damned.
I think they try. I don't know. I think that the media right now is in a very sad state, especially in the U.S.
And it's getting worse because, of course, everything is owned by his allies, and the bits that aren't are on the chopping block, and the bits that still manage to maintain a relationship with the truth are facing threats of losing their licenses from the head of the FCC and getting killed by Donald Trump, talking about the death penalty being introduced for journalists who are treasonous. And by treasonous, he means telling the truth about what an almighty mess he's made of everything in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Would it change anything? Final question, and you don't have to answer it because I'm not sure I can. Would it actually change anything? Because remember that the media here, and presumably in the States as well, contains very, very, very stupid people who use the phrase Trump derangement syndrome. So you've always got the get out clause if you are wrong about everything. And in this country, it would involve Brexit and Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and the rest of it. In America, it would probably involve the insurrection and the lies about the 2020 election. But even if, say, 30, 40, 50, 60% of the media started describing Trump accurately as deranged, dishonest, disgusting, depraved, would it actually change anything for ordinary people? Whether they agreed with the assessment or not, would it change anything?
I don't know.
No, I don't know either. You have to hope it has to matter, doesn't it, on some level? It has to matter that he's all the things that you've described him as, and yet I don't know.
But we live in separate realities.
Yeah, that's true. We live in separate realities. And I guess in some ways the question I'm asking is what can bring the two realities together? What, because you suggest, I hope you're right, optimistically that the war is going to change a lot of people's minds. It is going to bring the actual reality into sharper focus for people currently inhabiting Trump's alternative reality, which is, of course, full of alternative facts, as Kellyanne Conway warned us unintentionally in the very first term. But there it is. Thank you, Emily. And my sympathies, actually, what you describe is incredibly powerful. So imagine the trauma of shepherding, caring for your children while under fire, and then having that thought in the back of your mind that this is being done by a madman. This is being done by a madman. And that makes absolutely everything worse. It makes everything worse. But would it make anything better if everybody was describing him accurately? It's 10:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I predicted Osama bin Laden would knock out the World Trade Center. I made that prediction a year before he did. I said, you better get him. He's a bad guy. I watched him be interviewed one time, and I said, that's a bad guy. You better get him. 1 year before exactly, I wrote it in a book.
In the full clip, he can't even remember the name of the book, which is understandable because he didn't actually write it. But it's also a lie. It's a lie about a lie about a lie. And I don't know, is there a point where dishonesty becomes derangement, where you're such a bad liar that you are mad? I don't know, but that's what we're examining today, probably fruitlessly. But it's the question that interests me most at the moment, particularly after yesterday's display. Why? Is there still this collective failure or refusal to say what we see? Roy Walker will be turning in his grave. Say what you see. And what you see is a deranged liar. Lying in a deranged way. And we still can't go there. Still got think pieces everywhere from the BBC down, behaving as if these are normal circumstances, being occupied by normal people. It's a Turkish proverb, and it's a thing of beauty. When a clown moves into a palace, I want to get this right because it's absolutely lovely. The palace becomes a circus. When a clown moves into a palace, he doesn't become a king. The palace becomes a circus. That's second-term Trump right there. But why are we still not calling a clown a clown? Rebecca is in Glasgow. Rebecca, what do you think?
I think that everything's down to self-preservation. We saw it start in his first term with the likes of Bandy Lee losing her position at university, other top psychiatrists that were coming out. They were telling everybody what they were seeing very plainly. They were very careful around their wording, but it still had adverse consequences on them. I follow a number of people online,
Sure.
the likes of Ben Meiselis, Aaron Parnas, Brian Tyler Cohen, and they're trying to get it out there. But they're finding that they're being deplatformed all the time. They're also finding it's to their lives.
We saw Don Lemon got locked up, didn't he? So
Yes.
you think, I mean, self-interest is generous, and none of us know how we would behave in circumstances that we are not yet in. But there's a combination here of wanting to stay in the game and therefore needing to abide by certain restrictions. Otherwise, you'll get sent off. You'll get disqualified. And then, of course, you move into the realms of cowardice and people who are surrendering their responsibility to speak truth to power because they're frightened of what power will do to them in return. I don't know where the line is. I do need to stress that Roy Walker is alive and well. So just for the avoidance of doubt, today I've managed to resurrect George H.W. Bush and kill off Roy Walker. My apologies to everybody involved for that.
See, I think
God, he must be getting on a bit, though. Carry on, Rebecca.
This is why governments are treading so lightly. We can all see and say what we want.
Yes.
We can all do it, but governments right now are treading very lightly because he is so volatile. But it's going to come a point where they're going to have to sit down and say, we can't do this anymore. We literally cannot do this anymore.
It feels like we might be approaching that moment this week with Iran, and particularly with the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes. Well, I mean, the thing is, there was another article yesterday that was posted that frightened the life out of me, and I think it was Michael Finoni that posted it. And it was either J.D. Vance or one of his ilk had said that his ICE agents would be going door to door to check people's status. Now, we've seen this before, and I think the world is now so conveniently divided that people are not going to stand up for themselves or stand up for each other because of the fear of repercussions on themselves.
Yeah.
And we are now in a position where we don't have time to analyse these things. We have to be acting now, because if we don't, then we have got a person who's sitting in the White House and saying the quiet bit out loud now. And it's not just that. He has got this little group of people who are pushing him on. They know his mental state, but it's convenient for them. They're making money out of it. They're getting he's clearing the path for them.
So there's lots of reasons here for why people aren't doing what might strike some of us as being necessary and obvious, and they're compelling reasons. Self-interest or self-protection, however you want to share them. But why then, and in the case of politicians, there's diplomatic considerations as well, clearly, albeit that everyone seems to be learning the lesson that if you tickle his toes on a Tuesday, he'll still punch you in the face on a Wednesday. But why then would British commentators still be so craven, cowardly and spectacular and catastrophically wrong? And I'm not going to let you say because they're doing what their bosses tell them to do, because I know that isn't true. in the case of prominent newspaper columnists, for example? Why would they still be so reluctant to watch what we've just watched, to listen to what we've just listened to hear what we've just heard, and not conclude that offering any support for Donald Trump is obviously both disastrous and ridiculous in equal measure?
Because I think at the moment, because nobody's doing anything about it, they're looking at who's next in the White in number 10. And if he were to get in, then their positions are on a sugary peg. And I think it's literally looking at the bigger picture, because we've got our own Timo Trump, and if that were to get into power, then everybody who has spoken out or said anything would be in exactly the same position as the people over on the other side of the pond.
Okay, I mean, I don't agree with that last bit, but I haven't got a better analysis to offer up, and so I can't dismiss it.
In my honest opinion, I think we're beyond the days of articles of impeachment. I think in order for things to go back to some sort of balanced position, you're looking at Article 2, Section 4, and get rid of the entire administration. Because if it's the little quiet ones in the background, the Stephen Millers of the administration, who are literally just lining everything up nicely. They get rid of the Mad King, and then they take over and say, well, it is what it is, and carry on regardless. So the entire administration has to go.
I suppose it's the reluctance to call him a Mad King that is underpinning what we're talking about today, but you've offered up some powerful explanations as to why that would be. Whether or not it would change anything, of course, you've also answered, because if enough people were doing it, then the pressure for change, the pressure for regime change, to coin a phrase that's popular in a slightly different context this week, would become irresistible. And that's why he surrounds himself so completely with sycophants, not just in terms of colleagues and cronies, but in terms of media and commentary as well, because it's the only way you can sustain this level of lie. And that's where we're back to. We've done the derangement, we're back to the dishonesty. 10:57 is the time. But thank you, Rebecca. From Scotland to Sweden, Peter's in Stockholm. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm a huge fan.
You're very kind, thank you.
Yeah, I think Emily, the first caller, set me up quite nicely for what I want to say. She said that we live in separate realities.
Yeah.
And I think the point is polarity, and I think you've said that, so I'm just nicking that off you. The point is polarity, and that's also why I would like to say I don't actually think he's mad or deranged.
Do you not? See, I didn't used to either, but I now I'd probably fight that one.
No, but I think he's moving within some type of semblance of rationality, and I think the rationality is no. I think sorry, James, to disagree here, but I think the point here is I think what he's accomplished, and it's I say it in a neutral sense. He's accomplished the undermining of our shared understanding of what passes for reality. If you think about fake news and alternative facts, when he says things, I don't think he necessarily needs to believe it himself. The point is only to erode what we can see as our shared reality. And why that benefits him, and this is the point about being rational, I think he understands that division is useful for him. Without a shared reality, there's less accountability. You can weaken institutions by framing them as something they're not, and not getting so much pushback. And with the weakened institutions, you have fewer constraints. If you have a fragmented world, which he is, all of his actions point to that. I'm not sure if that is his plan, but what he gets from a fragmented world is more leverage in negotiations, which suits his maximalist ambitions on the world stage. So I think it's not so much that he is acting as a mad person. I think he wants the division. He wants the polarity. It suits him to have a fragmented world both domestically and on the international stage.
And because it suits Vladimir Putin even more. But that could just be a coincidence. That's not necessarily...
That's probably a coincidence, yeah. But I think now I don't want to be too much of a hobby psychologist.
Don't worry.
But I do think there is evidence to suggest that he doesn't really admire strong men, authoritarian types. I think there is something, and I think there's something a little bit, and I don't want to be too dismissive to Americans, but in their culture, I do notice something about winners and losers. They like to in my opinion, obsess a little bit about that. And so I think that's why he does get these applause sometimes when he depicts people as either being winners or losers.
Yeah, and that's why he loves the wrestling so much. I mean, when first explained to me, I can't remember who it was, that it might have been Johnny Vaughan, actually, that you need to understand WWF, is it called? That's the World Wildlife Fund. But the showbiz wrestling thing, you need to understand that to understand a lot about Trump, and they sent me a couple of articles about it. It was absolutely fascinating, and it ties in with some of what you describe. I suppose I would defend the deranged thesis by saying all you're doing is describing method in his madness. You're not necessarily disproving the madness. But I tell you what else Peter has done. Thank you, Peter. What would it be like if you knew someone like this? There must be people watching Donald Trump thinking, God, just like my ex, or just like my boss, or just like my brother, or just like my sister. I wonder if we get a phoning out of that one day. I don't think today. I think we're all probably in danger of trumping out at the moment. But if you actually do recognise, because a lot of people use a lot of phrases. Peter, a little cautious than many when it comes to amateur psychology. I'm probably not as cautious as I should be and not as cautious as him. But when you recognise that personality type, that kind of character, the person, a bit like Boris Johnson, who doesn't seem to process truth and untruth in the way that the rest of us do, but who is presented with a series of choices, some of which happen to be truth and others untruth. And his decision about which choice to take is defined entirely by self-interest or something more psychologically subtle. I find that really, really interesting. In fact, why don't you text me? If I'm not taking calls on it. It's WWE, not WWF. Why don't you just text me on whether or not you know somebody who Trump reminds you of, or indeed vice versa, and then I will judge. So, got one, he's just like my dad. There we go. I'm not paying for your therapy, but I am poised to possibly do a phone-in later this week or later this month, built upon the idea that he does actually remind you of somebody you know. The time now is 11:02.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 5 minutes after 11, and it is time for a conversation about domestic politics for the first time in what feels like an age. And I make no apology for returning to one of my... listen, all of my favourite subjects, with a couple of glorious and often hilarious exceptions, are favourite subjects precisely because I think they're so important. I could be wrong, of course. I mean, there are things that I think are really important that may turn out in the great scheme of things not to be. But I think we're usually more right than wrong. And when it comes to the relationship between the younger generation and work, I can't think of higher priorities for a government in the long term than taking as big a chunk as possible out of this army of 18 to 24-year-olds who are not in education, employment or training. It seems to be to the benefit of absolutely everybody to get these wheels turning, but more than anybody else, to the benefit of the people caught in this limbo. And I obsess a little bit about the fact that I've never nailed this subject. I'm not coming at it from the angle that I've failed to nail before. In fact, it may be part of the reason why I have failed to nail it, is that I keep coming at it from the wrong angle, because I work on the principle that there's an element of choice involved, and that young people are opting out through choice. And some parents have told me that they are, and some young people have told me that they are. But I look at the figures, I look at that number of 1 million, and that description of a NEET, not in education, employment or training. And I presume that there is choice involved, that people are choosing not to engage. If I was a Daily Mail columnist, I would presume that they're all lying about having mental health problems, or they're all lying about their circumstances in order to avoid getting work. But happily, I'm not, and never will be a Daily Mail columnist. But that doesn't mean I'm right about everything. It's perfectly possible not to be evil and still to be wrong. So I think it may be wrong to come at this always from the angle of choice, of people who could work but have chosen not to because the workplace is so toxic, or the property prices are so high, or the pressures are so unbearable, or the consequences of long COVID or COVID have robbed people of a degree of agency that they would otherwise have had. What if you're in this category of people through no fault of your own, through no choice. Polly Toynbee, who remains one of the finest journalists in the land, has written an article today which, well, she does something that will be completely anathema to people like Richard Littlejohn, is that she actually went out to experience the phenomenon that she was writing about for herself. When Richard Littlejohn wants to know about what's going on in the world, he watches 25-year-old episodes of The Bill from his gated community in Florida for much of his career. When Polly Toynbee wants to find out about what's going on with young people and jobs, she goes to the job centre in Tower Hamlets in London and sits in on meetings beside work coaches as they have their weekly encounters with unemployed young people. And that is what she has been doing this week, or last week. And she met people like a 19-year-old who did leave her last job because the circumstances had become unbearable, unbearable to her, but had no idea how difficult it would be to get another job. So she, with her work coach, goes through goes through vacancies and is told by her work coach, that 3,000 people will be applying for the 30 vacancies for administrators and caseworkers that have scrolled past them on the screen. I'll say that again because I think this might be the sort of gold Rosetta Stone that I've been looking for to understand this issue better. And it's embarrassing for me that I've got it so horribly wrong, if indeed it turns out that I have. So they find 30 vacancies for a 19-year-old woman in London who has a history of work and 6 GCSEs. She was working in a pharmacy for a year, but left because the atmosphere became toxic. She says, now, if I'd known how hard it was to get another job, I never would have left. I'd have sucked up the toxicity. And they find 30 jobs on the screen, and the work coach says 3,000 people will be applying for these jobs. 3,000 people. And then she encounters another young person, Ali, who has a degree in maths and thought that would help him get a job in finance or accounting since he passed his finals in 2024. It hasn't. He's worked in temporary jobs, in stock rooms. He applies still for all of the jobs, but then they turn out to be commission only or working from home. So as he would say, not real jobs. That's not what he's looking for. He's signed up for a charity program that helps find work experience because, in his own words, he's so bored at home. Another talks about his passion being IT. He has a BTEC level 3 in computing science. That's about the same as 3 A levels. He got an interview recently, but says, I was too nervous. I think I messed it up. I didn't have the confidence. So his coach is arranging him to have interview practice. There are training courses, but at the moment, there's nothing for them. Did you know that in 2009, Gordon Brown introduced a scheme to help people into work, particularly young people into work whose lives had been turned upside down by the global financial crisis? I don't think you heard about it, probably, or if you did, you've forgotten. It was called the Future Jobs Fund, and it boosted participants' chance of employment by 27%. And David Cameron axed it in 2010 without having waited to see the results that showed a £7,750 gain per participant in increased wages and tax receipts. So this isn't about young people choosing not to work, and I'm sorry that I've conducted so many conversations from the perspective that it is. This is about young people who simply can't find work. And it's about what this government, in the hope of emulating the huge success of the last Labour government, it's about what this government is planning to do to change things. I need to talk to employers, and I need to talk to 18 to 24-year-olds, because what is on the table is something that I don't have the skills or indeed the knowledge to properly unpick or analyse. What they are suggesting, what they are proposing, what they are doing is offering a £3,000 subsidy to employers to hire young people who are currently on benefits and have been out of work for 6 months. So they're redirecting the money from the benefits bill to the wage packet of the young person. The employer is then freed of the responsibility of paying this person until they've had an opportunity to get their feet under the table or to get their hair wet. It would be a 6-month-long subsidised wage role for the 18 to 24-year-olds. That's one element of it. You've also got a £2,000 grant to encourage smaller employers to take on new apprentices. The current apprenticeship levy has been used to invest in existing staff historically, and they want to focus on young people and new starters in jobs. So I want to know what it's like to be a young person who really, really wants to work but isn't. And I want to know from employers about, well, I mean, partly why you're not hiring, I suppose, but I'm much more interested in whether or not this help sounds like it might work, because it did work under the last Labour government. Not just the Future Jobs Fund, but their broader policies as well did turn things around. The New Deal for young unemployed people got very large numbers of people into work. But as Polly Toynbee points out in The Guardian today, the economy was on an upswing at the time. Donald Trump hadn't just started a war in Iran, and the general air, economically speaking, was a lot more positive than it is today. So there it is. I mean, a classic phone-in a way, but one which I'd like you to approach from the opposite angle, from the one we've adopted most recently. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I just want you to tell me, and I do like, and I don't know whether this is a reflection of my age as well, obviously, if you are aged between 18 to 24 and you can't find a job, but you want one, and you turn your radio on to hear some old git claiming that you've chosen to opt out, or that you are making decisions which I understand and sympathise with based upon the breach of the social contract. That's not you I'm describing. You would go and do almost anything at the moment just to get going, to get moving, but you can't get moving because there's 3,000 people applying for every job that pops up on your screen when you're down at the job centre. Just talk me through what that is. How hard is it for a young unemployed person in Britain in 2026 to find a job? All right? 0345 6060 973. And if you're an employer, I'd really like this to be an upbeat conversation, but obviously if you are looking at what I'm looking at and thinking, no way is that going to work, then I need to hear your voice. If you are an employer, would £3,000 in subsidy give you what you need to take a 6-month-long chance on a currently unemployed young person? So I want it from both angles. But before I get stuck into this, I have to say an awful lot of people think that they have Donald Trumps in their life, judging from my inbox. Dads, bosses, friends, colleagues, old school pals. We may get stuck into that later in the month. But what I want to focus on now is this crucial question of how hard it is for an 18 to 24-year-old to find work. And I mean meaningful work. And I'm not going to apologise for that. I mean a job that you think might turn into a career. It doesn't have to be degree level. It doesn't have to be highly paid to start with, but a job with what we used to call prospects. I don't know why I said what we used to call prospects. We can still call them prospects. Sometimes I feel I'm turning into everybody's nan or Miranda's mum. It's what I call prospects. Everyone calls it prospects, you flan. What are you going on about? So you want a job with prospects. That's why the lad in Polly Toynbee's article, who has done temping and who has worked in warehouses, is not happy with what he can get access to. A, there's no security. B, there's no permanence. And C, and crucially, there's no prospects. There's no prospects. And I don't want to confine this conversation to graduates. I really want you to call me if you got your A-levels or your GCSEs or your MVQs and you were proud when you passed them. You've done your bit. You've kept your side of the bargain. And the workplace has not yet appeared in your life. I don't know that, I think we've all let you down, but I don't know that it's easy to apportion blame. All I do know is that today, I'm not blaming you. I'm not blaming you. It's not your fault, and it must feel like it is. You wake up in the morning and it's another day of twiddling your thumbs, or another day of going down to the job centre to be one of 3,000 people applying for 30 jobs, or another day of being told that maybe you should retrain as this or that, or we can send you on a course, and all you want's a job. And then you listen to old people, presumably not just on your radio, but also in your family, who think it's as easy as it was when they were young. Well, I did 7 paper rounds, says your dad. Or I went out and got a job in River Island on Worcester High Street my first day after leaving school, says this old git on the radio. Oh, I was working as a waiter every evening and selling suits all day, every day. Yeah, but I can't. The opportunity is not there. The question of why it's not there is interesting to me. But the question that is much, much more interesting to me is what's it actually like at the moment? And why is it so hard? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I also want to know about employers. So you are in charge of a business. This is important. Pay attention. This is you, right? You are in... Because you might not realise I'm talking about you. That happens quite a lot on the radio, largely because you're not paying proper attention because you're busy doing your job. So you are running a business, right? And in different circumstances, or perhaps in current circumstances, you would be able to hire a young person. You could take on someone new tomorrow if the circumstances were slightly different. Okay? Would a $3,000 subsidy towards their wages for 6 months be enough to make you give it a whirl? I just want you to tell me whether or not this sounds like sound policy. It's dry, it's potentially dull, but it's important. Does this sound like sound policy to you? I'm imagining what I would be like, and forgive me, I'm always a little bit unpleasant when it comes to employers telling me they can't afford to hire young people. I have a terrible habit of saying things like, oh yeah, what car do you drive? And they say, a Bugatti. And I go, ha! Ha 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 ha! So, but that's not very helpful either, because you're the business person and I'm not. So you are not currently hiring, but you could. What would it take? What would the tweak be? And does a $3,000 subsidy for 6 months to help cover the wages, does that sound like something that would make a significant difference? And be honest, please. Leave your politics at the door and focus on the young people and your business and the importance of getting the former into the latter. It's 11:21.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 11. If you're just tuning in, you may never know where my inbox is currently absolutely chock-a-block with people texting or WhatsApping the words Joe Biden, the words Roy Walker is alive, and the words my dad is Donald Trump. You'll never know, unless, of course, you avail yourself of the opportunity to rewind live radio and address some of the questions I asked and rather embarrassing mistakes that I made in the course of the first hour of the programme. But on we go. Into familiar but unfamiliar territory. 18 to 24-year-olds, unprecedented numbers of them in neither education, employment nor training. Not just why, but crucially, how hard is it to find work? And what do you think if you're the employer of the government's plans to provide a £3,000 subsidy that would enable you to take someone on for 6 months and train them up, get them ready to become proper earners, as it were. Let's start in Portsmouth. Darryl is there. Darryl, what would you like to say?
James, hope you're well. Love the books.
Thank you, mate.
I'm a small employer in Portsmouth.
5'4"?
5'7". I love the idea of the scheme, but for me it's just not quite enough. I don't think the subsidy is quite large enough to quench the thirst, knowing how drowned my inbox comes when I am looking for somebody to fill a position. I just know that I'd love to employ young. I'd love to help mould somebody into the industry. But for £3,000 to take a risk when I could employ somebody for a little bit more money and have them hit the ground running.
Oh, I see what you mean.
It's not quite enticing enough to think taking that risk might be worth it.
What would be? I mean, ideally, you minimise the risk through your recruitment process as well, don't you? So in the same way now that you filter through all of the CVs that you've got in pursuit of the best candidate, you would do the same with the subsidised young person, and you'd back yourself then to make the right decision. So we can minimise some of the risk in some of the ways like that. But what figure do you think would turn your head?
I don't know, because
I knew you were
I
going to
suppose
say that. You're no good.
I'll tell you why it's tricky. It's tricky because salaries vary so significantly that at this point right now, if I'm looking for my next person in a small business, I think a higher salary for as close to a guarantee as I could gain, whilst regarding, of course, that somebody could be a complete failure, logic suggests to me that somebody on a higher salary with experience is going to be a more likely chance of success.
I mean, you don't have to tell me what line you're in, but you're welcome to. What would training somebody up involve in your business?
For me, probably a decent amount of time and resource. So the £3,000 would probably be gone pretty sharply. It's not really gonna scrape the barrel of compliance training and time spent doing so.
Right. Okay, I understand. So, there are other elements there that would be very specific to what you're doing. Some people would be able to hire someone and not really have to spend any money, just time, on getting them up to sniff. It's a shame, isn't it? Because I sense
you'll begrudge me, of course, for suggesting that time is money in business, right?
Yeah, no, I know it is, but I'm saying they're not giving you time; they're only giving you money. So that's the only distinction that I'm drawing. I sense you would quite like to. What about the other benefits? If I come to work for you at 18, don't you get something in return from me that you're not going to get from someone who's already got 10 years on the clock?
Potentially, but I think that's the complete unknown variable, isn't it? And that variable can only really be achieved if it's alluring enough for me as an employer to take it on. And I mean this completely honestly. I would love the idea of taking somebody from scratch. I sense
that, but the system as it stands doesn't make it worth your while.
It's essentially a month's wages, and that's not quite enough for me to think that it's the option.
Oh, it's a month. Well, 36 grand gross is not an entry level position.
Well, when I factor in, of course, it's training. So if we talk about the time taken from the rest of the team, or from myself, or from the resources, it's a month's rate. It's a month's wages net.
Okay, yeah. And when I say, well, it's better than nothing, you say that's not the point, James, because
I could go and get somebody else elsewhere and likely have an income in return.
Yeah, you're great. Brilliant. Thank you. That's really helpful. And of course, you speak only for you and for people in similar positions. There will be employers who find this a deal breaker, but it's interesting also that we can't quite put our finger on what that figure would be. Apprenticeships would be different, of course, in the context of what is subsidised and what they are designed to achieve. But if you're looking to fill a role and you got someone with no experience, then Daryl's experiences are crucial to understanding the challenge that the government faces. And in his case, they have not risen to it quite enough. Jenna is in Cambridge. Jenna, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good morning. Or good afternoon. Not sure what time it is, but I'm calling in. I have a master's degree from Imperial, and when we graduated with my cohort cohort organisers told us that historically this degree would allow us to go into our next job. We should expect no less than receiving a salary of £50,000 because of what the degree had taught us and the qualifications that were associated with it.
Yes.
A lot of my friends are international students. When the sponsorship fees for them to stay in London was increased, many of them had to go home and they weren't able to find jobs that hit that 50 grand salary, let alone, also I'm aware that this is this is a huge salary compared to what a lot of people would have to start with. So I understand
but it's what you signed up in hope of, so you don't need to apologise for that. You worked very, very hard on your master's and your undergraduate degree, and these were among the reasons why you did so was the mooted salary you'd get at the end of it.
But the point I wanted to call in with is the kind of perspective that I have is that I'm a home student and I wanted to continue my studies. I found a PhD within 2 months of looking. So I had a 4 months internship after my master's degree. I started looking in January. I had secured a position by the end of February. Many of my friends were still looking for jobs in London in the field that we graduated in.
So had you not signed up for a PhD, you fear that you'd be in the position that they're in?
Very likely, yeah.
What about the internship? Why would that not have led... forgive me if I'm being nosy, but you know how this show works. Why would the internship not necessarily have led to a permanent position?
The internship was working for... I was a research associate for a PhD student in Mozambique.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't something I necessarily wanted to stay. I loved working there, and it was the role was amazing. But
you got me the giggles now. So I don't know why. I was a research associate for a PhD student in Mozambique. Well, why aren't you doing that full time?
Yeah, I mean, I could go back. I had a great life there.
Well, you said internship. I don't know why. I thought you were working for a big, like a FTSE 100 or an engineering company or a
student, James.
No, I know you are now, but you weren't then, were you? So what I mean. So now you're going to be a doctor when you finish the next round of studies, and you're rolling the dice again on that being the qualification that will open the doors that are still shut in the faces of your cohort from master's level education. It's scary, right?
Yeah, it's scary, but I've got my fingers crossed. I think I'm going to be okay. But a lot of my friends haven't had the fortune that I've had to be able to be like a home student, be able to pay home fees, for example.
I see.
Many of my current friends, where I work now, they're getting PhD offers and they're incredible students, but the fees for international students don't let them stay because they need to pay 3 times the amount that I do.
Yeah, so which is, of course, I think a conservative policy driven to drive down overall immigration figures. So great, well done. Whatever the... it's not quite a brain drain, is it? It's more like a sort of brain moat or a brain portcullis to stop brains coming in to the country to study and then often stay and work. The final question, I promise. If you could go back and ask your master's supervisor why these £50,000 starting salary jobs hadn't materialised for your peer group, what do you think they would say?
I think that the value of work my friends who've done the degree with me offer, I think the work that they can offer is valued less now. Okay.
So the jobs might be there, but the salaries will be lower.
No, the jobs are there, but the salaries are too low to sponsor them to stay or...
Oh, okay. Right, I get it. Yeah, I mean, again, I think every caller, and I need to be more patient about this. I sometimes get a bit allergic to specifics. I say, well, that's very specific to you. And I'm going to defend myself on the being a research associate for a PhD student in Mozambique. That one I could say, that's a little bit too specific to teach us any very broad lessons, but the rest of it is not. And of course this is about specifics. Daryl's specifics in Portsmouth of £3,000 not being enough to take a punt on somebody new when he's got a drawer full of CVs from people who've already got experience. There are specifics there that help us understand the likelihood of the policy succeeding. In Jenna's case, there are specifics that help us understand why getting the kind of job that you were expecting hasn't happened. But whether or not the government can do anything to help in this case is unlikely. 11:32 is the time. Lottie Morley has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
25 minutes to 12 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Andy's been in touch. He says, 10 to 11 this morning was the best hour of radio you have ever done. Far be it from me to agree with that, Andy, but if you did miss it, then don't forget you can download everything these days from Global Player or the LBC app. You can rewind and listen back, even pause live radio. Well, you can pause live radio now, right? You could pause me and you could rewind me, but you can't fast forward if you haven't paused first. You can't move now to 11:46, for example, unless I get the time wrong, which, given the state of the first hour, some elements of the first hour of the programme, Andy's high praise notwithstanding, is perfectly plausible and feasible. Henry Riley's up next, 11:45, 11:46 in fact, he'll be here. So you could fast forward to Henry Riley if you could fast forward live radio, but you can't. Henry Riley will be here with the latest instalment of Riley's Reform Roundup. And I'm told that there's a bit of a clamour now in the newsroom among all the young journalists here who are all very keen to get involved in this glorious feature. So we may even have a kind of son of Riley's Reform Roundup later in the programme with another LBC journalist bringing us, helping us expose Nigel Farage's party to the same levels of scrutiny that the right-wing media reserves for Labour and increasingly the Greens, actually. 11:37 is the time. George is in Vauxhall. George, back to employing young people, or not. What would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call. Big fan of yours.
Thank you.
Yeah, I run a small tree surgery company and have done for...
Just small trees, is it? What, like bonsais?
Yeah, small in number of employees.
He was a small employer in Portsmouth and a small tree surgeon in Vauxhall. Yeah. Sorry, George, carry on.
I'm actually 6'1", so not as small as I sound. There's another joke for you.
Go on.
Yeah, so I've been running it for about 25 years. Wow. I'm kind of in the succession phase of the business, but I employed someone as from the New Deal scheme, which was run by the previous Labour administration, and that was, and at that time the bursary was £400, so that's inflation for you.
Yes,
but it was very helpful, and it was an incentive at the time because
it meant you could take someone on and you'd get help with their wages until they were an employee who you didn't need help with their wages for, because they were essentially paying their way.
Well, yes and no, because in that case, the £400 bursary, as it sort of was at the moment, I treated that as like a training budget. Yeah. Because you kind of have to pay people anyway in tree surgery. It doesn't matter if they're just there dragging branches or whatever. You're still going to pay them a decent wage for the work that they're doing. But what the problem is in our industry is the technical expertise that you need, the training you need to use a chainsaw safely on the ground and all of that does cost money. And that can be a disincentive for employers, and they may be tempted to buy in that expertise rather than grow it themselves or train people internally. I prefer, unlike your caller from Portsmouth, to grow my own staff, because when you import people from other businesses, they come with all their bad habits, or this is how we used to do it. And if you've got a good, productive team that are working well together, sometimes that can be quite disruptive, and you end up... So I've always been keen to grow my own people. I've had 2 apprentices, which one of which is still with me 10 years after doing his apprenticeship.
Wow.
And then the most recent employee we took him on as an 18-year-old, and we basically trained him from scratch. And now he has been with us probably 4 years, and he's got all his tickets now, and he's shaping up to be one of our best new climbers.
That's brilliant. So I sense that the idea, depending, of course, on where you are in your own arc as an employer, as a business owner, you're quite drawn to this government
very
policy.
Much so.
Good.
It's weird because about 2 weeks ago, when they, you hear about this, this 1 million young people.
Of course you do.
And I've been saying to my partner, they should bring in something like the New Deal.
No way, really?
Honestly, I have been going. They need to do something like that, because in my industry, where there's a lot of technical qualifications required, that can be a bit of a...
Of course it can.
And £3,000 actually goes quite a long way. That would get them the basic training they need to work safely on the ground is... to be able to use a chainsaw safely, but also to be able to climb the tree and rescue the climber if they get into difficulty. If they cut themselves up a tree, they are if the emergency services turn up with an ambulance, well, they can't get someone 30 foot up the tree. So
you make a really... But this is why I'm an idiot, isn't it? For being... No, seriously, I said to the last caller that I used to get annoyed with specifics when I was having conversations like this, because it's like I'm looking for the magic answer, the magic solution. But of course, it's all about specifics, and the specifics of being a tree surgeon make this proposal really important and attractive, because you can't have people doing what you do without any backup or training, and the training is expensive, and you're risking it. It minimises your risk, doesn't it, in a way?
Well, it does. It does to some extent. You've got that, but I mean, £3,000 would pretty much train someone to use a chainsaw on the ground and be able to do to be trained in aerial rescue, and that is a really good starting point. And even if they didn't stop, even for one reason or another, they didn't continue their employment with you, that would make them eminently employable by any other tree company. They would, to be able to buy in someone who can use a chainsaw safely on the ground and can do an aerial rescue that would pretty much get you any job in any tree surgery company. So even if you weren't a good fit, say, with our company, that would certainly
you've got movable skills.
And I wouldn't have lost anything out.
That's what I mean by reducing, not minimising. Doesn't remove your risk. Final question, and you don't have to answer it, because I don't know if it's fair, not on you, but on young people in general. Over that 25-year career, have you noticed any significant changes broad, generalised changes in the calibre of candidate coming to you? No, I didn't. I'm glad you said that.
No, I think it's on. Personally, I always say I think it's on the employer. You've got to give people a chance.
Yeah.
Now, this guy I was telling you about that we trained from the ground up, over 4 years.
Stop saying things. You're a tree surgeon and you're growing your own people and you're growing things from the ground up. I'm just dying of puns over here. I'm a comedian and I don't know it. Go on.
But basically, he had a little bit of a blip along the way.
Okay.
And the crew were going on, he's no good, he's not really pulling his weight and all the rest. And I went, maybe that's on us. Maybe we haven't trained him properly. So I put him with a different person, a more experienced person. I said, look, we need to make sure that this person, we have to give him a second chance because I suspect that he's okay and it's on us.
Sure.
We haven't trained him properly. And, so we did that. And, of course, he turned a corner. He was the person I suspected. And he's gone on, to achieve everything that he's achieved.
And then there's a benefit to both of you.
I think it's, we need to give young people a chance,
Beautifully put. I worry sometimes that we live in a country where we forget good stuff done by Labour government for reasons that are pretty obvious to anyone who listens to this programme, and my pet obsessions on a regular basis. But that Labour's New Deal delivering significant change, and then the Future Jobs Fund that Gordon Brown brought in 2009, providing measurable improvement to the lives of both employees and employers. And then David Cameron and George Osborne came in the following year and scrapped it without having waited to see the results, because, as I have often mentioned to you, austerity was an ideological decision, not an economic one. That was lovely. Thank you, George. Another one, actually, Dan in touch to talk about the New Deal being the way through which he got his job within the NHS in 1998, and he's still there 28 years later. It's coming out to 11:45. A little more on this and some Riley's Reform Roundup on the horizon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:48 is the time. I actually had some tree-related questions, but I felt that Will was too much. So I've got my raised bed. I've put the new topsoil on my raised bed, ready to. I'll do my beetroots probably this weekend. But there's a tree in next door's garden. It's some sort of fir tree, and it sheds these little brown balls. They're like like mini Maltesers. They're tiny, and they sprout like you wouldn't believe. I had cardboard down on my raised bed all winter, and they've even sprouted under that. And I imagine there's anything you can do about it, but I felt that would have been a slightly inappropriate or unprofessional question to ask a tree surgeon who spends his life up trees with chainsaws. Apart from chopping down next door's tree, which is frowned upon, even in Brentford, I don't know what my options would have been. But next time I get a tree surgeon on, be prepared. Henry Riley is here with Riley's... Oh, no, we're not, are we?
No, Paul and Clapham.
No, thank you, Paul. But don't call us, we'll call you, I think. I've got a few people asking how they submit their... But I don't... So, I mean, Patrick says, I've got... And it is St. Patrick's Day. I have a theme song for Riley's Reform Roundup. How do I send it in for review?
Get on the email.
I send it to Henry.
Riley at Globe. I thought we were going to do it all together.
At global.com.
There we go. Thank you. We'll work on that.
So, for people not familiar with Riley's Reform Roundup, it is our attempt to expose reform correctly to the kind of scrutiny that the rest of the UK media happily provides to other political parties, most notably the Labour Party. And it is, as ever, hard to know where to begin, but we are often led to Kent.
Thanks for having me back on, by the way, James.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
After Friday.
Yeah. Thanks.
There's the Kent, which, to remind listeners, is that... Well, we had a bit of a bust-up on Friday, didn't we?
But we didn't.
We didn't know.
But if you were to go to the racist corners of Twitter, you will find people who think that we... So Henry and I can't even engage in a little bit of... What would you call? So what's the theory? The theory is that I have banned you from... Because you weren't on yesterday.
Because I wasn't here.
Because you were recovering from your overnight shift.
Yes.
Or your late night shift.
And because you rule the roost...
I rule. They treat me like a god, you know.
They decreed that I was banned from your programme for showing you up, James, but...
Love it.
I've been allowed back on.
Carry on.
Kent, which is the sort of shop window for Reform UK councils.
Right, that's enough. Thank you very much. It's 10 to 12. Henry Riley's Reform Roundup has hit the buffers. Go on, back to Kent.
And they made a lot of hay of this council. It's a huge authority, and Reform won by a landslide in May, and there's now a concern because potholes was one of their key priorities. However, pothole numbers have now doubled in a year. Kent County Council said in January 2026 there had been 7,200 reports compared to just 2,800 in the same month of 2025. A rise of 157%. Reform UK say the recent extreme weather is one of the main reasons for the impact on highways. Yeah. A spokesperson said there was a prolonged cold spell after Christmas followed by persistent heavy rainfall. The Conservatives, though, said, I'm absolutely shocked at the state of our roads in Kent under this Reform UK administration. The cabinet member responsible for the highways needs to significantly up his game to overcome this major pothole problem.
So they've got worse by a factor of 157%.
In terms of the reports, a Reform source did tell me, though, that they have highlighted the issue and that they're getting more reports of potholes because they...
Right, of course they are.
They've done so well at sort of highlighting the issue.
Yeah, so it's not problem's exactly the same, it's just more people are pointing it out.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Next.
Warwickshire, and you'll hear more about this with my colleague George Ike later on, who's spoken with the 19-year-old leader of Warwickshire.
So he's joining Riley's Reform Roundup?
He's trying to get on the bandwagon, I think.
Jumping on the bandwagon,
well, and he's very
probably
welcome.
heard there was a vacancy, Henry.
I know. I'm going to be sort of trying to cut out the line or cut the wire.
Do we need... And George Ike, his name doesn't lend itself to like an alliterative little slogan as easily as yours does. Ike Spikes.
I'll have a think, actually.
Spiky Ikey, I don't know.
Spiky Ikey.
Spiky Ike, carry on.
A Reform UK council leader has defended his actions. I spoke about this a couple of days ago. You may remember this, James. George Finch, who's the leader there, had accused the police of withholding some information. The police say it would have jeopardised a potential rape trial. He's facing a no-confidence vote today on his leadership. More on that later as we get it. But an independent investigation has now ruled that he breached the council's code of conduct by publishing information that could have jeopardised the trial, and he published a letter on his social media at the time which was said to have he was asking for more information that wasn't in the public domain. The police said there was good reason for that.
Yes, it's a familiar problem for some people who like to deny that they're far-right adjacent, is that they claim to care about the victims of certain types of crime and end up potentially jeopardising trials of people accused of certain types of crime. If only we could identify what the common factor was. On we go, Henry.
Back to Kent, and Reform have been accused of a U-turn. They previously promised Kent would be the first council to declare a migration emergency. This was due to appear at Thursday's full council meeting, but after advice, it's now suggested they're going to, well, it would leave the council in breach of electoral rules because there's a by-election. So they've now been accused of U-turning by saying they will not put forward this motion to declare a climate emergency. The exact wording of the motion was that it would declare an illegal migration emergency in the county, describing small boat crossings as an invasion which put a strain on public services and finances. Various Reformed councillors, two in particular, put their names to this. It called on the leader of the council to demand the government stop the arrival of small boats in Kent immediately and cover its costs, but that motion has now been pulled.
Do they want them all to go to Essex instead?
Well, they just don't want them in Kent.
No.
So unclear how you tackle that.
What's the other side of Kent? No, not Amsterdam. This side, like if you went Hampshire, is it?
Hampshire. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think it would be, wouldn't it? I'm terrible with
Essex, London. Yeah, me too. Carry on.
And can we go elsewhere? This is in Wales. Where
do we know whether the leader of Reform UK in Wales lives in Wales? Yeah.
So just to remind, this is Dan Thomas, who was the previous Tory council leader of Barnet. He then was registered and lived in Bath. And we don't know what his sort of exact location is.
He has been accused of not living in Wales by political rivals.
Yes, he's been accused of not living in Wales. He says he does live in Wales.
And his former colleagues in Barnet said he told them he was moving to Bath.
He told his former...
Which is not in Wales.
No. He told
there are baths in Wales, but Bath is not in Wales.
That's not the actual place. Yeah. He told Conservative councillors on Barnet Council that he was moving to Bath as opposed to somewhere in Wales. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
I'll help out again. So we've got builders in at the moment, and you probably can't hear. Oh, it stopped again. You probably can't hear it, and now I get loads of messages saying that there it goes again, and it distracted Henry because he's not been doing this as long as I know. He's not used to just carrying on regardless and ploughing through all manner of distractions as if like a swan with my little feet paddling away furiously below the waterline. Henry just allowed his feet there to come into view.
Very unprofessional. A Reform UK councillor who aspires to be a Senedd member has been criticised after appearing to claim that the Church of England functions in Wales, despite the fact the Church of Wales has been a separate entity since 1920. Ian McIntosh defected from the Conservative Party in 2025. He now leads the Reform group on Powys County Council. He was on a review show and said, I picked up this story in The Sun and it's entitled For God's Sake. Now, it's a story about how the Green Party would drop the Church of England as this nation's established church. The presenter then said, we need to point out this is not applicable in Wales, of course. When asked about that and whether he knew that the separate establishment of an Anglican church in Wales 106 years ago, he said, yes, I did know that, but it wasn't what I was focusing on.
Oh, OK. 19th century disestablishment, if memory serves.
Yes, exactly, yeah, and it led to the to being a separate entity in 1920.
You can hear the builders on the radio. Thank you, Johnny. Carry on, Henry.
Two more national issues now.
Labour. Four. Jeez, are you making up
this is number 5 now.
Because you were in Purda yesterday.
Because I wasn't here yesterday. Labour are calling for a tax investigation into Richard Tice from Reform UK. It was on the front of the Sunday Times that he had, quote, avoided nearly £600,000 in corporation tax to his property company. Our colleague here at LBC, Deputy Political Editor Aggie Chambray, asked him about this yesterday.
On tax, it sounds like what you're saying, and it'd be great for you to clarify. Would you encourage everyone to pay as little tax as possible if that's sort of within the legal limits?
Yes, by the legal limit, of course.
So
that's what you should do.
So you would encourage everyone in the UK to pay as little tax as they possibly
what you should
can?
Pay what you're legally obliged to pay. Don't morally or voluntarily give more tax to incompetent, wasteful, hard-left socialist governments to waste on your behalf. Definitely not.
So that would be Reform's policy in government. If Reform is in government,
if you want to pay more tax, if your wonderful LBC viewers and listeners want to pay more tax, good luck to them. I suspect they all agree with me. I suspect they'll all say, I'll pay what I'm legally required to pay.
At a press conference in Westminster on Monday, Tice said that Quidnet Rates Limited was a UK company paying UK tax in accordance with UK laws, saying there is no obligation to pay the maximum tax required, and suggested few people would likely take such a decision.
It was quite an obscure I mean, loophole, no suggestion of illegality.
Yes.
But it has subsequently been shut down, I think, or he's no longer in this particular.
That is true. He's no longer involved with that. He also points to Labour Party Properties Limited, which he says hasn't paid corporation tax since 2000. So there's all kinds of...
We'll just have it, because everyone agreed we needed to investigate Angela Rayner, so we'll just have a little investigation, will we? They're all in favour of that?
There hasn't been any call for an investigation within Reform UK into this so far.
Oh. OK. He could always move to Dubai, and then he wouldn't have to pay any tax on his income at all. He can't do that if he's an MP, can he?
Probably not, actually.
How many is that? 6?
6, and last one... 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... No, this is 6, sorry, this is number 6. A related story from Richard Tice. He said £700 million Reform UK have saved in waste. Just to give you the figures, a sort of thorough breakdown, he has said that they've saved £350 million so far, but what's been flagged as curious is that he points to savings of over £400 million for 2026-2027.
Excellent.
Which obviously hasn't happened yet. He didn't go into detail about the savings, saying that the figures had been signed off as reasonable by a Section 151 finance official, but didn't give any breakdown as to how they've saved future money.
So they're just saying we've saved £700 million, but they're not actually specifying where.
That would be the.
They just publish the breakdown, no?
Well, we've had a few. Let me walk you through one. I mean, Reform claims it renegotiated one particular contract in County Durham that was to do with a Teesside waste incinerator. However, it looks like since much of that came through the previous administration.
Yeah.
Reform also claimed in Lincolnshire it had saved £13 million. However, the previous runners of Lincolnshire County Council, the Conservatives, told The Guardian that the new service had already been designed and was already awarded to the company as the preferred bidder. There's also, I mean, if you look at Kent, for example, they said that they had £39.5 million. We spoke about this at the time, James, that they'd saved of potential future spend. One MP wrote to the council and said they shouldn't use that because you can't claim to have saved £40 million when you haven't spent £40 million. They say this is through future schemes like not switching to electric.
So I have saved £1 million. I've saved, about £100,000 today by not buying a Porsche.
Yeah, the car analogy is probably a fair.
Yeah.
But you might have bought.
Can we
a
put
Porsche.
that in the news bulletin? James O'Brien has saved £100,000 today by not buying a Porsche, because I might have bought a Porsche.
And that is the criticism, that they haven't actually made these savings because they haven't spent the money.
And council tax is going up in all of the councils that they...
Yes, although they would say below the average.
But they did promise it would go down.
On election leaflets, it said lowering your taxes.
Thank you. Can I... Oh, we're a tiny bit late. Just play a bit of that clip of Tice again, will you? Can we just... I just want to ask you a question, hand on heart, all right?
Yeah.
On tax, it sounds like what you're saying, and it'd be great for you to clarify. Would you encourage everyone to pay as little tax as possible if that's sort of within the legal limits?
Yes, by the legal limit, of course.
So
that's what you should do.
So you would encourage everyone in the UK to pay as little tax as they
pay
possibly
what you should
can?
pay what you're legally obliged to pay. Don't morally or voluntarily give more tax to incompetent, wasteful, hard-left socialist governments to waste on your behalf. Definitely not.
So that would be Reform's policy in government. If Reform is in government,
If you want to pay more tax, if your wonderful LBC viewers and listeners want to pay more tax, good luck to them. I suspect they all agree with me.
Is he trying to sound like Farage? Have you picked up on that there? Quite a few people listening have.
What with shutting down the question, perhaps?
But also his cadence and his sort of... Also this ludicrous rhetoric. He doesn't... I mean, I presume that his parents spent enough money on his education for him to know what socialist actually means. Or even hard left, which is, I suppose, a slightly more debatable definition. But he's sort of using these ludicrous things, but more the sort of tum of the way that he's talking. Does he always sound like that?
No, I mean, he's often sort of deployed in different ways to Nigel Farage. He's seen as sort of a bit more relaxed. Well, in some ways, I mean, he's very different to Nigel Farage in the sense that for people who are maybe put off by Mr. Farage, they might not necessarily be by Richard Tice, different audiences. But I mean, you're right. He does. That is certainly a different approach to what I've seen at previous press conferences, and I've been in a few.
Well, it's not just me. It crossed my mind, but Jay says he sounds just like Farage. Callum says its speech patterns sound like a really bad impression of Farage, which is he's an odd person to do an impersonation of. But I don't know. Maybe all cults together. 6 for 6.
Thanks for having me back.
You're very welcome. Yeah. Just watch it. It's 12:03.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 7 minutes after 12, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A bit of a change of pace now. I wasn't expecting to do this, but I'm very surprised by my own reaction to it. Okay. And sometimes when I find myself surprised by my own reaction to something, it can make for quite an interesting conversation. Don't forget, we've got George Ike joining us a little later for the second round of, well, it needs a new name, Riley's Reform Roundup with George Ike. It'd be like when people stand in on holiday and it's the James O'Brien Show presented by Suella Braverman. I'm not even joking. Seriously, imagine getting trolled by your own boss. Back to that phone-in that we might have in the future about what it's like if you've got somebody who's a bit like Donald Trump in your life. I got told off on Friday. I don't know if you were listening. It was Simon in Dover. Sometimes names really stick in my mind and other times they don't. And he was perfectly entitled to tell me off. But he was being a bit unfair on me. I was not suggesting that everybody who has moved to Dubai is deserving of derision. Quite the opposite. I stressed on several occasions. I've got quite a few friends who have either moved there and come back or who are or have been there currently. There's lots of reasons to do it. And, you know, the weather's nice and there's something a little bit unjust, I think, for people moving to a tax-free regime while almost certainly planning to come back and benefit from the infrastructure that has been paid for by people who have never benefited from emigrating to a tax-free regime. I just think that's really important. And there's something quite unpatriotic about people who've made a ton of money, partly as a consequence of benefiting from the infrastructure. So, you know, when people say, I run a business, I work bloody hard, I don't get anything from the government, and you point out, well, how would your workforce get to work without any roads? Or, you know, God forbid someone were to attack our interests overseas, what would we do to defend them without an army or a navy? And by the way, you know, all the people you employed, did they go to school? Did someone teach them to read and write? Did you pay for that yourself? Did you pay for that out of your profits or out of your own pocket? Or was that the taxpayer? Was that Muggins, the ordinary taxpayer? So I also don't like even footballers. You know, when they've made a ton of money and they decide that they're going to go and live in Dubai because then they won't have to pay any income tax on their earnings in this country. I get it. I'm not getting holier than thou about it, but I think there's an ethical dimension to tax and a patriotic dimension. So the Tice character in the last hour with Henry's thing there, talking about how everyone should strive to pay as little as possible, without mentioning that what wealthy people who have inherited large sums of money often do is pay large sums of money to tax experts to find ways in which they can minimise, even if it's only temporarily, because they found a loophole that subsequently gets closed. It's deeply unpatriotic to try to minimise and dilute the contribution you make to the public weal, to the public good. So what annoys me sometimes when we talk about tax is when I tell you that I'm proud to pay a lot of tax. I mean a hell of a lot of tax these days, and I am still proud to pay it because I look at what it provides to people who are not in net profit when it comes to the relationship between their incomings and their outgoings, and it makes me feel patriotic. I never feel more patriotic on a personal level because I'm not a member of the armed forces or the public services. But I never feel more patriotic than when I contemplate how much tax that I pay. And sometimes I feel very patriotic when I remember all the work that we do together to defend the national interest against everybody who would wish it harm. The kind of people who pretend to be patriotic while actually paying accountants large sums of money to avoid paying their fair share. Their fair share. There's a difference between fair and legal. That's the distinction that I think you either understand or you don't understand. And if you don't understand it, you're who St. Paul is talking about when he describes the love of money being the root of all evil. If you do understand it, then you're comfortable and proud to pay a large amount of tax because it reflects how lucky you are to get paid a large amount of money. And you live in a society where most people don't get paid as much as you do. Therefore, of course, you should be putting your shoulder to the wheel to improve the general lot of the entire population. So there's a few reasons here. But then you get a message that says, why don't you pay more voluntarily, to which you are missing the entire point of tax. So if everybody moved heaven and earth to pay as little tax as possible, the Treasury would be in an even deeper hole than it is already. And if everybody avoided paying tax by demanding that those who recognise the importance and actually the beauty of taxation within a society should do so voluntarily, then you miss the entire point of tax. 12 minutes after 12 is the time. So I want to get all that in place, right? I think there is something suboptimal about some of the people and reasons given for going to live, for being an immigrant in Dubai, although, of course, we call them expats. If you're reading them in British newspapers that routinely attack immigrants. Some of these immigrants in Dubai have become refugees in the United Kingdom, where they have every right to be, but they are refugees because they are fleeing the dangers in Dubai, whither I think flights have now been called off until the summer, such is the precariousness of the situation. Some airlines, probably not all, I don't know. I get all that out there because I read this story and I didn't feel what I thought I'd feel. British expats fleeing the war in the Middle East have called on the government to urgently clarify whether they will face large tax bills on their return. This is national news. Admittedly, we're only talking about 160,000 people tops, of course, many of whom will not have left the region, but they have been warned that they could face an increased tax bill if their stay here goes beyond the 183 days that they're permitted to spend in the UK during a financial year. And, of course, the next one ends in April, so it ends at the end of next month. So people would have taken their allowance up to the wire, and most people presumably, and I'm tax exile, so I don't know, and I also love Britain. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I also love London because I live here, as opposed to getting my information from racists on social media who've never even visited. But I'm weird like that. I presume that you like to spend as much time here as you can if your work allows you to, but you keep a very close eye on that 183-day limit. So by the time you're getting towards end of February, middle of March, you've only got a relatively small number of days left, if any, because you've kept it quite tight. And then lo and behold, you can't get back to Dubai because the flights have been called off after drones damaged fuel depots at the airport. And you know that if you go over the 183 days, then you might become eligible for income tax in this country on your earnings. And I don't know if you witnessed me cracking out the world's tiniest violin a couple of weeks ago, but I did. I played it live on the radio. Spoiler alert, I didn't. I just made some strange noises and pretended it. And I can't do the high enough noise anymore. I used to be able to do a Morton Harkett impression when I was young. Can you believe that? I used to be able to hit the highest notes. Now I can't go any higher than this, really. Wait. Yee! That's about as high as I go. So when I was playing the world's tiniest violin, it was frankly embarrassing for all concerned. And I didn't. I mean, by the end of this conversation, I may well have reached for the world's tiniest violin, but I have some sympathy for people in this position because it's about, for me, it's about terms and conditions. It's about the fact that you have made certain sacrifices in terms of seeing you've prioritised not paying tax over things like family and patriotism and contributing to the public good. I sound like I'm having a go now, and I'm not. I'm just saying I know that not everybody is like me. And it's the fact that it's war. This is the crucial point behind the question that I'm about to ask you. It's the fact that it's war. It's an entirely unforeseen circumstance. I got a friend trying to fly back from, I think it was Australia, via the Middle East, and insurers don't take war or their insurer didn't take war as a reason for refunds because it's not an act of God, I think was the rationale that was given. It's not a natural disaster. I suppose if Donald Trump's in charge, you could only really describe it as an unnatural disaster. But if it's a war that has stopped me going back, it's not a matter of choice, then... Well, let me read you what a partner at a big accountancy firm says. When you are trying to move your family to safety, you are not focused on day count rules or technical residence tests. While HM Revenue and Customs has updated its guidance to acknowledge that the outbreak of war can qualify as an exceptional circumstance for residency purposes, the rules remain highly restrictive and are strictly limited in scope. Choosing to stay in the UK to be with family after the initial crisis has passed typically does not count as exceptional. So should people who are here to avoid the war in Dubai, where they have chosen to live, lose their exemptions from paying tax in this country if, as a consequence of avoiding the war, they exceed their 183-day limit for being in this country? And why am I not playing the world's tiniest violin? Jay's already been in touch. He said, here are my thoughts on this story. And he wrote, ha 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 ha. And I thought I'd be like Jay. In fact, I think you thought I'd probably be like Jay as well. But at the moment, I'm not, because it's a war. And if you've made your calculations according to one set of circumstances, and that set of circumstances changes completely entirely beyond your control, and you choose to prioritise your safety and your family's safety over your... Can I say greed, or do I lose the room if I say greed? No, over your arrangements, okay? Now, your arrangements might be born of greed, but it's not your greed that you're prioritising over safety. You are coming back to Britain for X days, and if those days exceed the 183 that you're allowed to be here, should the taxman give you a break and let you continue to enjoy it? So just come at this honestly. I mean, laugh at me if you want. Tell me I'm an absolute idiot. I need to give my head the mother of all wobbles, and you won't be losing any sleep whatsoever worrying about these people who have abandoned their own country in pursuit of untaxed income and have come scurrying back at the first sign of trouble and have started bleating already about being required to pay for the privilege of living in this sceptred isle. But I don't quite feel it. Go on, give us a call. 0345 6060 973. Should people who are only in the UK because there is a war in Dubai be required to pay tax in the UK if they exceed their limit? Tell me why. Or crucially, tell me why not. So I sense from my inbox that I haven't done a brilliant job of explaining my own position on this. I don't like this practice, and I don't like this tribe of influencers. But as Simon in Dover reminded us on Friday, there's loads of people living in Dubai who don't fit any of the cliches, except the tax avoidance. They don't fit any of the cliches that we like to apply to these people. Should they be entitled to avoid paying tax in this country, even if they end up spending more days here, as a direct consequence of the war and the dangers in Dubai? Your thoughts on this, please. 0345 6060 973. I'm comfortable with unanimity. If you all think I'm an idiot and I've taken leave of my senses and you think I'm planning a secret trip to Dubai soon to relocate and launch a radio station, then I fully accept your criticism. Don't hold back on the grounds that everyone else will think I'm an idiot, so you don't need to point it out as well. But I think there might be something more interesting here. I just need a little bit of help from you in describing to me exactly what it is. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I think one bit missing from my slightly unexpected analysis of this story is that these people aren't all like mega loaded. There's plenty of people who have relocated to Dubai, often temporarily, who are working as doctors, teachers, speech and language therapists. No hostages, one of my favourite Blue Sky correspondents reminds me. They go after graduation, they work for a while, they try to save a deposit, they use Dubai as a hub for travelling, and then they return home. So their financial calculations, albeit that they're going to be much healthier than they would be if they were paying income tax in their home country, in this case the UK, their financial calculations have been quite carefully considered. And something like this would drive a coach and horses through their plans. So try not to think about some idiot influencer and think instead about a young teacher or a young professional who is not going to stay there forever, but who has done the calculations about getting on the property ladder and getting enough together for a deposit, and they were mobile and fluid enough to go there, and they've done all of their numbers, and then a war starts and they come back to Britain and realise that they're about to go over the 183-day limit, and that would involve them paying tax in this country, and that would completely destroy all of their financial planning in the short term and elements of it in the long term. I mean this, by the way. I'm just interested in what you think. James is in Camden. James, what do you reckon?
Normally, I'm pretty aggressively left-wing on this stuff, James.
Go on, then.
But
but this time it's my money.
No, well, I'm not there. It's other people's money. But I know loads of people who have done this. I've worked with a lot of people, family members have done it, and I don't agree, but ultimately I want everybody, regardless of income, to have the same treatment under the law. Therefore, if somebody is fleeing a war-torn country, even if they've been a horrible piece of work leaving the country in the first place, you've got to give them the exemption. And if we talk about influencers and all of these ridiculous people who are the edge cases,
yes, I think that's where I'm coming from, in that I don't want to let my natural, I hope, intelligence be polluted by extreme examples.
Exactly. It's the same as people arguing against refugees staying in the country because their child likes a certain kind of chicken nugget. It's a misrepresentation of what the majority of situations actually are. And, I'd agree with that up to a point, but some things that are not misrepresentations include the fact that these people are trousering a hell of a lot more money than their counterparts in this country are, and their counterparts in this country are paying tax. They absolutely are, but then we have to talk about other rules around expatriates. Like, a lot of the edge cases are big fans of Trump and the American system.
Yes.
But in the American system, you have to pay an awful lot of tax if you're leaving, which we don't actually have here, which is weird. And I suspect we would care less about it if that was in place.
Who are you thinking about?
I'm thinking about the way in which you have to pay...
No. When you find that your traditional left-wing leanings are strangely diluted, who specifically are you thinking about?
Possibly family members who left when they were younger, didn't have kids, and all that sort of thing. Made a load of money, eventually came back and minimised their
because I'm thinking about journalists, teachers, doctors, people who are earning way more than they would do in this country, but who are not, trousering at home. They're not wheelbarrowing at home. And
exactly. I mean, I'm in rarefied air, so I'm thinking of people who would be making like between 40 and 70 in the UK, and they've gone over there and they're getting the take home from 120. 140, something like that. So
yes.
it's still people who are extraordinarily lucky, but as I say, the law has to apply regardless of your income.
But it does. I mean, to be fair, I could use that the other way around. The law is that if you go over 183 days, you pay tax here.
Yes.
So the law would apply. I mean, in some ways, you're arguing that they should get an exemption from the rule that applies to everybody else. If you and I stay in the country for more than 183 days, we become immediately responsible for paying tax. And if they do, if the law was to treat everybody equal, I think I've done you here, mate. Haven't I?
But we are talking about an exemption for extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah, and up to a point, that works, but exceptional circumstances will be taken into account, HMRC say. But if you're staying here because... it's the trade-off, isn't it? Is that one of the reasons why you get to live this life in Dubai is because it is in the Middle East, and the Middle East is a notoriously volatile area. So you takes your money, you takes your chances. No,
yeah, to a certain degree, yes. But
what?
Like, they are very exceptional circumstances.
Yeah. So I disagree with you about that equality.
It's not a case of like, I've got to stay over here because I need to go to a wedding or I've got a family commitment.
No, this is where my thoughts started, actually, and then they went to the fact that I don't want my opinion to be coloured by the unpleasant types that we see on Louis Theroux's new documentary, or Lee Anderson's wife who lives out there. The reality is, normal people, the people I know who have gone there for a variety of reasons, including the difficulties of getting ahead in your 20s in this country compared to what it was like when I was in my 20s, and then being compelled to stay here beyond the 183-day limit, would drive a coach and horses through some of the things. And some of them, I know one person who would rather not be there, but who is sort of sucking it up in the short term in order to come back to Britain in the long term in a healthier financial position, at which point they will become, fully fledged taxpayers. I just think it might be a little bit more nuanced than the world's tiniest violin brigade allow. And James in Camden, the first caller, I'd be very surprised if he stays on the winning side, but at the moment it's 1-0 to the Dubai immigrants. Steve's in Nottingham. Steve, what do you reckon?
Hey James, I guess that's sort of thrown me a little bit now, because I came on all out to say, well, I think if you're going to Dubai in the first place, you're going to be in a position where wealth is on your side, or you're optimistic in that sense, in that you know what you're going to try and achieve while you're there. But then when you put it into perspective of we're looking at people trying to get ahead, just trying to get established in life, then I guess, is there a take there where...
I don't know. I'm just mooting the possibility that there might be.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I think that there is the element of, well, if you're coming back to this country and you've benefited from tax exemptions in a different country, then you should pay when you're returning back to the country. It's simple as that. We are all paying while we're in this country already, so I don't see why there should be an exemption there. But then I think when you start to put a different spin on it...
I'm doing 2 years there. I'm doing 3 years there. And if I do that and I get my head down and I'll miss my mum and all my mates, and there's elements of the life here that are awful. It's not exactly a cultural oasis. And I do like things like theatre and what have you. But I'll do 3 years there, then I'll have enough for a deposit. I'll come back to Nottingham and I'll buy a flat, and then I'll go I'll go back to a job that is taxed at PAYE, all of the above. And then this happens, and I get hit by this 183-day rule, and I'm going to have to do another 2 years there. Is that fair? Is that fair?
Exactly, no. And you give up that right as soon as you go out there, right? In the sense of, you know what this national security is, you know what the risks are. You're moving to the Middle East. This could happen. It's reality. And you've already benefited by being there, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're there a week or a month or a year. You've benefited financially.
Yeah.
From being there. So why is that unfair to say, well, if you come back, well, yeah, you should pay a little bit extra for coming back.
Yeah, well, you're a score draw, aren't you? You're a walking, talking score draw, Steve. I think that's what I might be. And of course, you can't really have one rule for them and another rule for the others. So you can't say, oh, here's someone nice who's only doing it to get the deposit for a flat together, and here is some absolute hideous influencer. They should have all their taxes taken from them the minute they get off the aeroplane at Heathrow. You said that, and that brings us back to James in Camden's comments about everybody being equal under the law. I quite like this. I'm not entirely sure. Apparently, I've made a terrible mistake. Ah, dear, because I think I made this mistake on Friday as well. It shows that I should pay more attention to these matters. Have you spotted the terrible mistake that I've made in the course of the last 5 minutes? It's a biggie. I'll correct it after the headlines with Amelia Cox.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Have you got a pendulum? I have a pendulum, and it swings sometimes quite freely. And my favourite subjects historically are what we like to call pendulum subjects. So you can start at 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock thinking one thing, and then we get stuck into it. You heard it with the last caller, actually. It was literally while he was on hold, he felt his mind beginning to change, or, if you prefer, his pendulum beginning to swing. So mine swung back again now, because quite a lot of you have pointed out that the teachers and the journalists and the speech therapists and the like are not going to be permitted to take 6 months a year off from their jobs in Dubai. So who exactly is capable of living as an immigrant, as an economic immigrant in Dubai, and coming back to Britain often enough to push their allowance close to the 183-day limit? And the answer is probably, I don't know, it's probably going to be the wealthy, isn't it? The more wealthy. But I still find the question a little bit more interesting than I thought I would. If you're just joining us, it is a question of expats, or immigrants as we'd call them if they weren't British, fleeing the war in the Middle East, calling on the government here to clarify whether they'll have to pay tax bills, large tax bills potentially on their return, because they would, having exceeded the 183-day limit, they would become eligible to pay tax on all of their income in this country, which at the moment they don't pay at all. Because they are based, for example, in Dubai, where you can't get back to at this precise moment in time because a drone damaged a fuel depot at the airport yesterday. I just like the nuance of it, but I have to tell you, Lee Anderson, 30p Lee, do you remember him? It's not his wife that lives in Dubai. And apparently they're not even married. It's Richard Tice's girlfriend who lives in Dubai. So my apologies to all concerned. I don't know who I should be apologising to more on that, for suggesting that 30p Lee was married to Isabel Oakeshott, and not engaged to Richard Tice. Of those three people, who is more deserving of my apology for my misunderstanding of their domestic arrangements? Who would be most offended? It's almost a phone in that, wouldn't it? Who would be most offended by that suggestion or by that misapprehension on my part? Anyway, my apologies to all concerned, but I don't know in which order those apologies would be offered. I mean, God forbid I'm feeling sorrier for 30p Lee than I would be for Oakeshott or Tice. But anyway, I got that wrong. Well, there's a show full of mistakes today, and many of you think that this approach to this particular story is the biggest mistake of them all. Well, bring it. Tommy's in Durham. Tommy, what do you reckon?
Hi, good afternoon, James.
Hello, Tommy.
Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
So just to put in a little background in there for you, James, is I was in the armed forces for 25 years, and when I retired in 2011, I went out as an armed security guard on the oil tankers through the Straits of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb Straits, Gulf of Aden. But that was about protecting the ships from the Somali piracy.
Yeah, blimey.
Now, when we did that, we were the same 183 days out of the UK, or we paid tax on return, and it was quite a well-paid job, I would say.
Yeah.
So when we got our month off after every 3 months away, we wouldn't go home. We'd go to Thailand or somewhere else to waste our holidays to stop us coming back and adding up the 183 days.
Oh, really?
So I understand these families need to be safe from Dubai or wherever else, and they can go back to UK, but I would expect them to pay tax. Because they don't have to come to the UK. They can go to Spain. They can go to Tenerife. They can go somewhere else for the month or 2 months or 3 months or whatever it is.
So you've got no sympathy for this argument at all? Oh, well, that's not fair, because you're not a cruel man. Well, all right, you said none whatsoever. But it's a trade-off, and the Crimea River, effectively, for the people who've been caught in the horns of this particular dilemma. What if there'd been a war, though? Because you weren't there. Obviously, it's a little odd having this conversation with someone who's ex-army. But you weren't actually there during a war, because you'd already left, and even if you were, you'd already left the army, and you were providing armed security on oil tankers, which I would like to talk to you about a little bit more. But before we do that, what if the war is the reason why? Does that not change it? Is it not such an unexpected circumstance, such an unforeseeable event, that it does put a slightly different complexion on things?
It does, but we're talking about, okay, I agree they should be safe and they should leave the war zone to be safe, but crying about having to pay tax because of the 183 days, that was normal to us because we were out of the country so long. I mean, if we come back to see our family or friends, we would have to pay tax.
So they could go somewhere else for a while. Let me read you one more. I'll have one more go at you. Okay, ready? I worked in the Middle East for 8 years, 2 in Dubai. There's a massive misconception about people living and working there. As soon as you say you're working in Dubai, people have an automatic reaction that you earn a ridiculous amount of money. The fact of the matter is that there's lots of things that are relevant. Salary was good compared to the same job in the UK, but what you actually have as disposable income is not that much more because, for example, rent is roughly 3 times what I'd have been paying for the same property in the UK, and 90% of the UK expats out there are normal people. Well, you and Richard helpfully adds, P.S. Biden and Roy are still alive. So he, like you, is a normal person, and unlike him, you still think that the rules are the rules, and just because a war has started doesn't mean that you should get to rewrite them.
Yeah, we're all getting paid different salaries. So, for example, I know it wasn't a war zone, but when I started protecting the tankers from the piracy, our salary was very good, and that was, it was really a lot more than I get in the UK.
Yeah.
But as time went on, and the warships started to appear to protect the shipping lanes, the piracy dropped off. In which case, so did the salary levels. So we had to either find another job because it was similar to a normal job in the UK, if I can say normal. So
I do understand. Yeah, so there's all sorts of variables in place, and we all have to roll with them. And just because you've relocated to Dubai doesn't mean you get a free pass on some of the variables that have come back to bite you on the bum. And of course, the other thing is that when we pay our taxes in this country, we're paying, among many other things, for the government to keep us safe.
Yes, and we also had to, James, we also were advised to get in touch with an accountant who will deal with it, who's an offshore away from home professional. So we used to use a company in Norway who specialised in oil rigs and workers that worked away from home.
Because you have such a strange...
They would make sure that HMRC weren't on your case until you hit the 183 days.
Yeah,
so
okay.
they managed it better.
I've got my pendulum is doing a weird sort of spiralling type movement now, Tommy. I was swinging, and then it was swinging back, and now it's sort of doing a strange sort of figure of 8 type of thing going on. When you were doing the security for the ships that were under threat from Somalian pirates, did you ever encounter any pirates?
Yeah, quite often, James.
Really?
Quite often. So in the years from 2011 to 17, I would probably say, well over a dozen times we had to protect the vessel with weapons.
What do you do? Just shoot over their heads, fire across the bows?
No, well, there was maritime laws we had to follow, James, so there was warning shots. They would get the captain to alter course and increase speed. There was fire hoses, there's warnings, and then we'd fire into the waters.
Really?
Warning shots. We'd fire at the engine block if it was good enough for the guys. And then lethal force was your last option.
Good Lord.
And that was because they had RPGs put into their shoulders or whatever. Then you had to do it.
It's pretty scary.
Well, it was okay.
Not to you.
It was a good salary.
Yeah, fair enough. Wow.
But again, about the tax, we knew that we had to stay out of the country or pay tax on return.
And that's the deal?
That's the deal, correct.
Love it. I'm okay. I'm on a pretty sticky wicket on this, or thin ice, or whatever figure of speech you prefer. It is 12:42. James has been in touch. So I just caught the end of your last segment, James. Did you say that 30p Lee has just got engaged to Richard Tice? Oh, well, congratulations to all concerned. Paul's in Amersham. Paul, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello.
Yeah, nice to speak to you.
We'll see.
We'll see. So I just come back on Saturday night from Dubai, visiting my son out there. He's got a 3-month baby with his wife. So it's been quite a difficult time, really.
Yes, of course it has.
And just so in mentioning the reason whether they should have some kind of leeway on the tax situation, I probably I guess you can't really change the rules for everyone, for one, and then make everyone else sort of abide by them. So I'd probably be inclined to say maybe that's a step too far.
Do you want him to come back?
Well, he's actually they're leaving
anyway
on Thursday. Well, they're not coming back to England.
Right.
His wife Julia is Italian, so they're going to go and stay with their parents there for a month, or even 2 weeks, I think. Then he's got to go back and work. Right. So difficult. She's got time off work because
it's a tricky time. It's a tricky time for everybody, and I don't imagine he's in a position. Unless something really weird happens, he's not going to be close to using up his 183 days anytime soon, is he, in this country?
No, because they've been out there for nearly 3 years.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And they haven't come back, so they've only came back... Well, actually, they came back for 2 weeks, the beginning of May, I think it was. No, not May, what I'm talking about. August sometime last year, so...
I like it. I like the wrestling that you're doing with your sort of personal love and loyalty and affection, but also the slightly overarching sense that if they were on the cusp of this limit, then it shouldn't really give them an exemption from having the same relationship with the taxman that everybody else who's spent over 183 days in this country in a single tax year would have.
No. I sort of agree with you on that, really. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I kind of think...
You can't agree with me, mate. I'm changing my mind every 10 seconds at the moment.
Oh, have you changed it? I don't know. It was 1-1 the last time I listened in. but just overall, I mean, there's a few teachers who've just gone back. They're going back again. They've just come back. A lot of people left quite quickly and paid a lot of money to get out of there.
Did they? They're refugees.
Friends of theirs.
They become refugees, although I don't think they're having their jewellery confiscated at the airport, as was mooted for other refugees relatively recently. Also, I mean, if I were feeling mischievous, and I know, Paul, you'd be in on this, that's not a serious observation, but aren't they supposed to stop in the first country that they pass through as well? Isn't that normally how it works? Thank you, Paul. It's a lovely contribution. Thoughtful. It'll never catch on. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:48 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I did have a missing word round for you, and it's actually one of my all-time favourites, but I've left it a little bit late in the game, and having said that, I've probably lost it. So I just thought I'd keep you in the loop, no particular reason. I like this. Monet, as in the artist, right, was so poor that he had to beg blank for money. See if you can guess what that is. Monet was so poor that he had to beg blank for money. Now, everybody at LBC is very excited by Riley's Reform Roundup. Nobody more so than George Ike, our reporter in the Midlands. And he has, as a consequence of this, conducted an interview with George Finch. It's a festival of Georges, who is the council leader facing a vote of no confidence that Henry has been bringing us up to speed with now for the best part of a fortnight. George, how did you get on?
Well, James, the interview was last week looking ahead at the vote of no confidence this week. And to say it was wide-ranging and we ended up on a vast number of topics would be something of an understatement, perhaps. We ended up talking about flags flying over public buildings, Black History Month, school transport, highways, all manner of different things. And you actually joined me here at Shire Hall just as that vote has concluded. Councillor George Finch has survived the vote of no confidence. 26 councillors voting for the motion to remove him as leader of the council. God. 27 voting against it and 2 abstaining.
Absolute nail-biter.
cinema in action here in Warwickshire, James.
Well, I admire your calmness in the face of such exciting events, George. Tell us a little more about I'll tell you what, mate, with your permission, you mentioned flags and Black History Month. I'm going to go out on a limb and say he's in favour of the first one and against the second one.
Yeah, quite an interesting exchange about the flags. That was one of the reasons that this vote was actually brought by the Green Party. They said quite public row with the chief executive of the council had brought the authority into disrepute when he said he wanted to ban the Pride flag and the Ukraine flag from being flown over the building. And the chief exec said, no, that wasn't the policy. So he drafted his own policy that essentially allowed that to happen. And I asked him a little bit about that in the interview, and I think we can hear a bit of that now.
If that means that we're going to get a protest outside because I took the Progress Pride flag down, so be it. But the only 3 flags that should fly from a county building, a government building, are the Union flag, the St George's flag and the county flag. Because they represent everybody. I don't care if you're gay, bisexual, black, Chinese, whatever. I'm not bothered about any of that. As long as you're a good person and you've got integrity, honesty, that's all I ask. I don't care if you want to be somewhere else.
But then why do the flags bother you? Because that was one of the things in this no confidence vote that was raised as one of their examples of where you've brought the administration into disrepute, was this disagreement with the chief exec over the flags. What if you don't care? Why do you care, if that makes sense?
Because it's a government building. It is owned by, in effect, the people. So we will listen to what the majority of them say. And the majority of the public in Warwickshire are represented by the Union flag, the St George's flag and the county flag. Put them up. It's the county council building.
And that conversation, James, ended up bringing us on to Black History Month, and where George was explaining to me that we shouldn't show preference at different times of year, and that history is history, and we should listen to it at all times.
We'll get that in a second. Just before that, for the benefit of people listening, this is George Finch, the council leader in Warwickshire, insisting that he doesn't care about anybody's identity. He only cares about integrity and decency. Just remind us who the leader of Reform UK is, would you, George?
Nigel Farage.
Well, that's the fella. Anyway, let's hear what he had to say about Black History Month.
Yeah, in my eyes, we shouldn't be celebrating Black History Month.
We shouldn't be, was that?
No.
Why not?
Because history is history.
Okay.
Black history should be every day. So should Jewish history. White history is history.
But I suppose there is a background to that in that they were persecuted.
Bad things happen in history. It's history for a reason. I don't just watch Nelson Mandela films in November because it's Black History Month. I'll watch them wherever because he's inspirational. You don't just go, I'm just going to watch him on that day because it's the... No. History is history. It's turning it political. History, Henry VIII chopped people's heads off. We don't look at that now and go, oh no, that's we should find the Tudors for doing that. It's history. It's what happened. We learn from our mistakes. People back then thought differently. They thought witches existed, for God's sake. They thought differently. As long as we can learn from those mistakes, fine. But we don't need certain months to identify the good things black people have done in our history. That should be every day. That should be taught in our history lessons, not separate days. I think it's not fair. The more you talk about it, the issue you create. If your history is history, no one's discriminated. No one feels left out. Because there's always key figures in history that are different. That's what makes it history.
Ah. You're a lot younger than me, George. I don't know if you ever saw The Office, did you?
I haven't. I have been encouraged to watch it, James, and perhaps this would be an opportune moment to pick it up.
I don't know why it just popped into my mind, but I couldn't recommend it highly enough. What do we know about Councillor Finch? He's very young, isn't he? Did he go to school?
He did. So Councillor Finch is 19, and actually it was a crossover of LBC's youngest reporter, which is myself, meeting up with the UK's youngest council leader here at Shire Hall to have this conversation. And he essentially was telling me in that interview that he feels the reason that he's been in this position and ended up with a vote of no confidence is because he's too charismatic, and at times it was sort of trying to keep him on the track of what the question was.
Whoa! He's too charismatic.
Indeed.
Okay. Have we got that on tape?
That was a touch charismatic, James. Can you calm down?
I mean, that is... Let's just have a little snatch, if we may, Keith, of the bloke who's too charismatic for his... I mean, it's a bit like that. Oh, you can't talk about Right Said Fred anymore, can you? Because they went weird as well. But anyway, he's too charismatic for his shirt.
I know you said that some of the left-wing parties have accused you of being too charismatic. Do you think, looking back now from what's happened so far, there are moments that you would go back and change if it happened again? I'm thinking particularly about the comment recently that was reported, boots on the neck type approach to getting things done. Do you think that was wise?
I think the principles of what was said are 100%. The residents totally agree that we need to make sure council officers are doing what the elected administration is doing. We need to make sure that it is a member-led organisation, not officer-led.
I mean, he has a point, George. Bad things do happen in history. It is,
James.
It is history for a reason. So you spent an hour with him?
I did, and then we've been in the meeting for 2 hours this morning until that vote came in, and there's been a number of comments made, one about Tory councillors being referred to using the poo emoji, another one where it's reported he posted a picture of a Tory councillor mocked up as a burglar, and then we had a series of comments from other Reform councillors saying he's in the papers more than Katie Price, and Bradley Walsh's agent wants to know how he's getting more airtime than Bradley Walsh.
Yeah.
So it's been quite a busy morning here in Warwickshire, James.
But he's away. He's out of trouble. I mean, it's still got a ticking off for potentially interfering with a court case, but it has not convinced his colleagues in Reform UK that is grounds for removing him from the role.
I put that to him, and he said that wasn't a problem because he was acting in the interests of his residents in Warwickshire.
And just on a scale of 1 to 10, how charismatic was he being when he said that?
There was a lot of gestures, which obviously don't work so well for radio.
Well, you say that. George, great stuff. I'm trying to work out what that ratio is. What was it, 27 to 26 with 2 abstentions?
Yeah, so 426 against 27 and 2 abstains.
It better not be 52-48, that. It's 51.9, is it? I think it is.
I'm going to have to rely on your maths, James. It's not my strong point.
None of us should be relying on my maths, George. Thank you very much indeed. Great stuff. And there it is. I mean, we often talk about charisma in the context of politics, but rarely have we come across a politician so convinced of his own charismatic status that he decided to do... What is he, like a David Brent tribute act? Is that fair? I was thinking David Brent. A couple of you were thinking Gareth. But I felt David Brent on that one. Great work by George Ike, and that is exactly the kind of politician we can look forward to seeing a lot more of. Should Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, and you heard the young man there saying all he cares about is integrity and honesty, should he continue on his current upward trajectory. That's it from me for today. If you missed any of the show, you can listen back. I think you can see George's interview with George in full as well at lbc.co.uk. Listen back on the Global Player or the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news, videos and opinions. Huge range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, best bits from my show every day, and of course the Full Disclosure interview series. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now with a massive happy St. Patrick's Day from me, it's time for Sheila Folk.
James O'Brien on LBC.